will now have the singing of the national anthem, led by the Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia. O Canada, terre de nos aïeux, ton nom est saint.
In all thy Son's command, with glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Qu'on ouvre les portes, let the doors be opened. Order. À l'ordre. Déclaration des députés. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray, Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 12 days till Christmas, the little elves from northern Alberta have compiled a wish letter for their so-nice brand new Santa. It goes as follows. Dear St. Stelmach, we have worked ever so hard over the past year, so please be jolly and not kingly and send us the following soon. On the first day of Christmas of this year, more land for houses. On the second day, 2 new recreation centres. On the third day, 3 new water treatment plants. On the fourth, 4 new senior residences. On the fifth day of Christmas, 5 new public schools. On the 6th day, 20 new doctors. 7th day, 25 new police officers. 8th day, 3,000 new homes. 9th day, new roads and bridges. And on the 10th day of this year, a bigger airport. By the 11th day of 2010, we will need 18,000 new homes. And by the 12th day of 2010, we will need 100,000 new workers. Santa, if you bring us all these things, then Northern Alberta will be equal and as happy as the rest of Canada. Thank you and Merry Christmas.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members know, December 10th was International Human Rights Day. The Prime Minister issued a statement to mark the occasion in which he is quoted as saying that Canada will continue to stand up for human rights and take principled positions on important issues to ensure that freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, values that define our country, are enjoyed around the world. Mr. Speaker, Canada is not standing up for the human rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada when it votes against the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Mr. Speaker, Canada has human rights to stand up for within our own borders as well as around the world. Thank you.
L'Honourable.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate this opportunity to thank the voters of my riding of Repentigny for the confidence that they placed in me on election night, November 27th. My thanks also go to the team of volunteers that guided and reassured me during my first election campaign. I also want to thank all my colleagues in the Bloc Québécois who, despite their busy schedules, found time to be with me in my riding. I want to say that I am proud to be a member of the Bloc Québécois team, and I want to express my support and openness. I do not want to forget the person who allowed me to take this step, who is my Catholic Bishop of Joliette. Special thanks to Monsignor Gilles Lucier. And in closing, I want to say you're a swell bunch to all the people in my riding.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, women in Canada are concentrated in low-wage and part-time jobs. They make only 71 cents for every dollar men make. Women make up only 20.8% of this House, and shamefully 1 in 5 Canadian women live in poverty. On Sunday, in every province and every territory across this country, women told the Conservative government, enough is enough. Women in this country are not happy with the government's slash-and-burn tactics on the mandate and funding for status of women. Women are not happy with the last 13 years of broken promises from the Liberals. The so-called Liberal Pink Book is a testament to what the Liberals never did.
That's right.
Women in this country deserve equality, childcare, affordable housing, and they deserve equal pay, Mr. Speaker. Both the Conservatives and the Liberals have refused to address these issues, leaving women still fighting for equality in 2006. The entire NDP caucus stands behind the call to reverse policy decisions made by the Conservative government that effectively work against women's rights. Women in the
Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is home to 13 UNESCO-designated biosphere reserves. Whether it's the Niagara Escarpment in Ontario, Mont Saint-Hilaire in Quebec, Riding Mountain in Manitoba, or Clayoquot Sound or Mount Arrowsmith biosphere reserves in my own riding of Nanaimo, Alberni, these areas are some of our most treasured ecologically diverse assets. The Canadian Biosphere Reserve Association has done an excellent job bringing the reserve volunteers together to share expertise and to develop models of sustainable human activity in and around sensitive and valued ecosystems. The excellent work done by Canadian volunteers has been recognized around the world. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, many of the volunteers are at risk of burning out. It's time for the government to provide a measure of support. This week I introduced M263, a motion that calls on our government to provide a base level of funding for each reserve to establish an office, to hire an officer, to coordinate the efforts of volunteers, and to promote the objectives of the Biosphere Reserve. Mr. Speaker, M263 is intended to capitalize on a Canadian success story and to help our hardworking volunteers provide public information and to increase appreciation of our most ecologically treasured assets.
The Honourable Member for Mount Royal.
Mr. Speaker, it is shocking, almost beyond words, that we face two genocidal threats in our day. The first is Ahmadinejad's Iran, which denies the Nazi Holocaust as it incites to a new one in its public call for the annihilation of Israel. The second is the accelerated genocide in Darfur, where over 400,000 have died, where 4 million are in a desperate life support system, where mass atrocity, rape, the bombing and burning of villages, forced expulsion are a regular ritual. Mr. Speaker, words and resolutions are important, but what is so necessary now is action and the political will to enforce the Genocide Convention and the responsibility to protect obligation. Canada, in concert with the international community, must act and act now. Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister for Francophonie and Official Languages, I am pleased to congratulate the new Mayor of Greater Sudbury, John Rodriguez, for raising the Franco-Ontarian flag at City Hall when he came into office on December 1st. I lived for 14 years in Sudbury. This is a symbolic gesture, but a very important one for the Franco-Ontarian community. As a new government, municipal government, the city is showing its willingness to have positive relationships with the Francophone community. The city deserves our congratulations for this proactive step in recognizing Francophones in Greater Sudbury. This is an opportunity for pride for all Francophones in Ontario.
Monsieur le Président, M. Abdelkader Belaouni est un citoyen algérien réfugié au sous-sol de l'église Saint-Gabriel de Pointe-Saint-Charles depuis janvier.
Mr. Balaouni is an Algerian citizen who is in sanctuary in Saint Gabriel Church in Pointe-Saint-Charles and has been there since January 2006. The government is turning a deaf ear to his fate. If he is returned to his country, where he has not been for 10 years, this would be an unacceptable step because he needs help here. He is blind because of diabetes, and I would call on the government to regularize his situation so he can contribute to Canadian society. The church congregation that has given him sanctuary has done so because they believe that Mr. Balaouni has valid humanitarian reason. The government, though, wants to return him to his country. I call on the government and the Minister of Immigration to regularize his situation. Mr. Speaker, the Marathon of Hope is in its 16th year. It took place on Saturday, December 9th at the La Samar High School in Pécéville. This is a dynamic town in my riding of Mégantic-l'Érable. The executive director of the co-op store there, Ms. Suzanne Corriveau, was the honorary chair. The marathon brought in $88,000, $28,000 more than the objective. This shows that everyone in the Plessisville area has taken part. This money will help people having temporary financial problems who have lost their jobs or are ill. This is why, as the member for Mégantic-l'Érable, I want to point out this generous donation by the people of my area. The Honourable Member for Madawaska, Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government is looking desperately to dismantle the just society that Canadians have built over the last few decades. The government is in an ideological straitjacket, and it is doing everything wrong. The issue of climate change is a great example. First of all, this government went back on Canada's word by moving away from the Kyoto Protocol. The Minister of Environment says no to gas emission credits one day, yes the next day, and then no the next day. She said that Canada had paid all its contributions, but then she was contradicted by her own officials. The international community has lost confidence in Canada's word. This is not what Canadians want.
Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, December 19th marks the 90th birthday of a great Canadian whose contributions to the arts, Canadian military history, and Canadian diplomacy will long be remembered by future generations. Hamilton Southam was the founder and first Director General of the National Arts Centre. Built in Canada's centennial year, Mr. Southam was on hand to witness its glittering opening night in 1969. Mr. Southam is also a World War II veteran, serving both the British Canadian Army and the Canadian Army. It was his determination that helped in the creation of a memorial honoring 14 valiant men and women. Mr. Southam, as president of the Valiance Foundation, sought to recognize the contribution of our wartime heroes who gave outstanding wartime service to Canada during the last 4 centuries. Unveiled in November of this year, the Valiance Memorial is another example of this remarkable man's contribution to Canadian military history. A true Renaissance man, we salute Mr. Southam on this happy occasion.
Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to give thanks today to Stephen Lewis, a passionate voice for social justice, whether as Ontario leader for the NDP, at UNICEF, or for the last 5 years as the UN envoy for HIV/AIDS. Lewis has focused the world's attention on this terrible pandemic and has especially decried the disproportionate impact on women. Last year alone, almost 3 million people died of AIDS, 4 million were newly infected with HIV, and millions of children are now orphaned. The inaction of wealthy countries and the pharmaceutical companies is unspeakable. However, Lewis calls the plan to create a new international agency for women, I quote, an unparalleled step forward in the march against the pandemic, end quote. Stephen Lewis has been awarded the Order of Canada, 22 honorary degrees, and the respect and admiration of millions around the world. With his UN posting coming to an end, we pay tribute to Stephen Lewis for his courage, his tireless work, and for inspiring so many people to act to end a pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, with $7.3 billion in stealth neoconservative cuts uncovered yesterday, more proof is surfacing that this government is hell-bent on dismantling Canada's just society. Check it out. $2.1 billion from improved student financial assistance, $550 million from students with permanent disabilities and students from low-income families. Wow. $550 million from EnerGuide for low-income households. All this with an inherited $13 billion surplus, the best economy in our history. That's just a start. Clearly, the only minority that Conservatives care about is their miserable minority government. When will Conservatives stop dropping the hammer on vulnerable Canadians and start governing for all Canadians, especially those who could use a hand up? Perhaps Christmas might be a nice time for Canada's new heartless government to at least start thinking about those in need.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Pierre-Boucher. The scars of the Shoah are still visible in Europe. The ruins of former concentration camps are maintained to remind us of the death of 6 million Jews who were exterminated in camps just because they existed. Humanity's moral conscience calls on us to never forget. There's a conference going on in Tehran that questions the existence of the Shoah, even though we have testimony from survivors and torturers. We have photos, we have films that have shown the horror of those camps. Still, people question the evidence of that. The Bloc Québécois joins with the United States, Germany, Great Britain, and the European Union to condemn in the most severe terms this political reappropriation and denial. The Honourable Member for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce-la-Chine. Mr. Speaker, this government is doing everything wrong. This is particularly the case of the Minister of Transport. On December 19th, 2006, the leader said that there was a clear mandate, but the Prime Minister criticized the Transport Minister. So for a year, we are hearing that from the Prime Minister that it is not surprising when the Transport Minister is not even capable of painting a bridge.
Oh, great.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to speak about a brave little girl, Melissa Lilly, from my hometown of Angus in my riding of Simcoe Grey. This sweet 9-year-old tragically has brain cancer, and my community has come together to help the family through this difficult time, particularly with the help of one of our town councillors, Sandy McDonald. The community has raised over $25,000 in a walkathon that took place on November the 16th. The money will help Melissa's mother, Caroline, stay in Toronto, where Melissa has up to 7 months of treatment left. I would like to commend the thoughtful efforts and hard work of the community and congratulate all those who have taken part in the fundraising, particularly the children from Angus Pine River Elementary School. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to represent the people of Angus who have tried to give the Lilly family some normality through this difficult time. I would like Melissa and her family to know that my thoughts and prayers and those of the entire community will be with them over Christmas and the coming months.
Oral questions, questions orales. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister tried to hide from Canadians the budget cuts for $7.9 million, but thanks to an agreement gained through access to information, we have uncovered these plans, and this is what we've discovered. $2.9 million for student aid, and cut $2.6 billion for research and development, cut $7 million for the environment. I would ask the Prime Minister, what is he most ashamed about? The fact that he hid these cuts from Canadians, penalizing Canadians and communities. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, these are not phantom cuts as described by the Leader of the Opposition, but I can say that in 2004, promises were made that there would be a committee that was going to find $12 million in cutbacks, and the member said at that time, back in February 2005, he said
$1 million or even a chunk of it without affecting some jobs. Well, Mr. Speaker, this government didn't cut $12 billion. This government did do some budgetary reductions and did it without cutting any jobs.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Take any harm to Canadians. Compare with what they are doing. First, they said in their budget that they will cut more than $7 billion. They didn't say to the Canadian people where they will do it, because they were embarrassed to say that. They are embarrassed to say that they are the only government in the modern world to cut students, research and development, and energy and climate change. The Prime Minister must be shameful today. Doesn't think he's shameful to do that, to cut in the economy of Canadians and for students of Canada.
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. What the honourable member is talking about, what the honourable member is talking about is not any programs that ever actually existed. What he's talking about are a bunch of promises that the Liberal government made year after year and never delivered. Mr. Speaker, that's why this government didn't cut those things. There were no such programs to cut in the first place.
Order. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
No, it was booked. Everything was booked. Everything is cut.
Order.
Order, please.
Order. We have to have a little order. The Prime Minister's not going to be able to hear the question. I think it's directed to him. And so we have to have some order so we can hear the question and then get an answer. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition, has the floor. We'll have
Everything was booked, Mr. Speaker. You have one... I know they are very ashamed of what they are doing. It's what they're protesting.
Order. We have to get on with the question. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition wants to put the question.
Does the Prime Minister not realize that he's hitting students hard? He's hurting the homeless. He's hurting the illiterate. This is what these cutbacks have done, and he tried to hide these cutbacks. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
They were booked. You know, I'm hoping that someday that $40 million that's missing in the sponsorship program, I'm hoping somebody over there will get booked as well. Mr. Speaker, these are things they promised the Canadian peoples for 13 years and never delivered. Leur bilan est une coquille vide. They're an empty shell. They have nothing to offer other than promise the same things they failed to deliver before.
Order. The Honourable Member for Westmount, Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the minority government is not being transparent. First of all, the Conservatives cut $1 billion from programs without even assessing the relevance or the efficiency of it. They did no analysis whatsoever, and now they're making additional cutbacks, and that the government tried to say nothing about it. They weren't even included in the fiscal update recently. Not one word about them. Can the Prime Minister tell us why he hid this truth from Canadians? The Right Honourable, or the Minister of Finance.
Calmez-vous les cruches, là!
Thank you.
Order. The Minister of Finance has the floor to respond to the question. We're wasting a lot of time today in question period, which is not suitable for Wednesday. The Honourable Minister of Finance has the floor.
The member opposite is correct, Mr. Speaker, that we are spending on our priorities and not on a wish list that they published just before the last election. The third wish list that they published in 2005. 3 sets of books in 2005 from the last government. We only have 1 set of books, and yes, we're spending on our own priorities. To check on their books and what happened to the $40 million, I guess we'll have to call their bookie.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government seems to have forgotten that it voted for Bill C-63, which, and this was unanimous, in which there were specific initiatives such as Energuide and all kinds of projects to assist the environment. And the Conservatives voted for it at the time, and now they're let's not have them tell us they've cut the program. They've cut these programs completely without doing any assessment. We demand to see the assessments done for these programs that were cut, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, as far as environment programs are concerned, we will have a program that will lower emissions instead of increasing emissions, as the previous government did. But as for these phantom cuts for programs that simply didn't exist, why did the Liberal Party hide its own program from the people? The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Maher Arar was tortured, and there was CIA stealth planes was used for the rendition, and these people were treated very poorly. These planes land very often in Canada. In the case of Maher Arar, his plane landed in Italy. The government announced that it will be looking into 3 other cases similar to that of Maher Arar. Will the Prime Minister to expand its case to look at these planes that are used to do extraordinary renditions? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the investigation can look into any issue tied to these 3 cases, but I can say that the Government of Canada looked at these allegations and found that there were no indications that there were any illegal activities that were carried out. The government is aware of the allegations, and we will continue to apply the international law in an appropriate fashion. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, that is exactly the same answer that the previous government had given. The same answer that we were given with respect to Maher Arar, saying that there was absolutely no problem whatsoever, that everything had been done very legally. And we saw what happened. Maher Arar is asking that light be shed on this issue, on these planes that were used by the CIA. We know that they did landed in Canada. We have the flight numbers of these flights, and we're asking the government to expand its investigation and to get the full cooperation of the United States and to get the cooperation of countries such as Italy. We want to know what happened. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government takes these allegations very seriously in all 3 cases. This is why the Minister of Public Safety has called for an investigation, a legal investigation. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has made certain allegations that are very specific, and we have looked into the facts. We have absolutely no evidence that support these allegations. The Honourable Member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. Mr. Speaker, this has nothing to do with those 3 cases. A report produced by the Canadian Border Services talks about 20 different planes for the CIA that have landed in Canada over the past 4 years. The flight numbers, the dates, the places are known. What is the minister waiting for? Will he hold an investigation? And if it's not illegal, well, the fact remains it was illegal, and it was one of these planes that brought Maher Arar to torture. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I can say that the Leader of the Bloc is right when he said that the former government did nothing for Maher Arar. That part is true. But as for the planes, the Canadian Border Services and Transport Canada looked into these allegations. And, Mr. Speaker, I can reassure the members that the pilots had a crew list, a passenger list, and these showing their date of birth, gender, etc. So they do have the information, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. The press attaché for the Minister of Public Safety said last April that the Conservative government would not be doing any additional checks. If the minister doesn't want to do an investigation himself, is he prepared to broaden the mandate of Judge Ibokchi so that he looks into these planes? The European Parliament has already struck a committee to look into this fact, but Italy is prosecuting people from the CIA. Why doesn't the minister do likewise? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. It's not in the mandate of Justice Iacobucci to do this type of study, Mr. Speaker, but I can assure my colleague, my friend, that we will continue be on the alert. We will continue paying strict attention to all of the planes like that. And if we have new information, I will share it with him and with all other members. The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Saskatchewan is nothing more than a pool for votes, and rather than a group of families with aspirations for their children. The Premier of Saskatchewan, Mr. Calvert, met with the Prime Minister last week, and coming out of that meeting he made it clear that it was obvious now that the government has no intention of honouring its promise to the people of Saskatchewan when it concerns equalization. The Minister of Finance is going to meet with his colleagues, the finance ministers in Vancouver, next Friday. Will the Prime Minister stand in his place today and indicate crystal clear that he intends to honour his promise to the people of Saskatchewan when it comes to equalization?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier of Saskatchewan has taken a position that on this that I don't accept. The government will fulfill its commitments in good faith. At the same time, the Government of Canada is consulting with all provinces and territories to get their input on a new equalization formula and transfer payment rules that are fair to all provinces. The leader of the NDP might want to indicate to the House whether he favours the position of the NDP government of Saskatchewan to exclude natural resources or the position of the NDP government of Manitoba to include natural resources.
Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, what this has to do with is a promise made by this Prime Minister to the people of Saskatchewan very, very directly for fairness. He was rather specific about it. Looks to me like he's waffling now. And of course, we hear the catcalls from the backbenches, but it's actually silence from the MPs from Saskatchewan on the government side of the House. They haven't delivered anything to the people of Saskatchewan when it comes to fairness. So my question is, if it's not to the Prime Minister, will anybody on this side of the House stand up for the people of Saskatchewan and say that the promise made will be a promise kept when it comes to fairness and equalization in Saskatchewan? Is there anybody who can?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Order. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister has the floor. It seems the Christmas spirit has taken a grip on some honourable members today. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor. We'll want to hear him.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can say with confidence that in the next budget, the Government of Canada, with the help of our Conservative MPs from Saskatchewan, will deliver the best deal for Saskatchewan it's ever had in Confederation. Whether or not it will justify this wasteful advertising campaign of the government of Saskatchewan is another question, and whether at that point in time we'll actually have a position from the NDP is another question. But, Mr. Speaker, since I may not be up again on my feet this year, let me just wish all members a Merry Christmas and thank the NDP for their help on the
Honourable Member for Etobicoke Lakeshore. Order.
Mr. Speaker, despite what the Prime Minister said about phantom cuts, the cuts reveal a clear intention to slash investment in post-secondary education and in science. And in so doing, that lays bare the very clear intention of this government to have no policy whatever on productivity and competitivity. Why is it that this government has no policy to create jobs today for Canadians in the future? Why is it that this government has no policy whatever to meet the competitive challenges this economy faces?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Not only do we have a policy, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan called Advantage Canada. Not only do we have a plan, Not only do we have a plan called Advantage Canada that will try to redress the lack of productivity growth in the last 10 years when the party opposite was the government, but our plan has the endorsement of the International Monetary Fund. In the report issued today by the International Monetary Fund, it praises Canada's new government for its commitment to allocating unplanned surpluses to lower the debt, to increase productivity in Canada, to lower taxes.
The honourable member for Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, the ideological and mean-spirited cuts by this minority government are without bounds. They have done nothing new to help Canadians with disabilities, and they have taken a giant leap backwards by slashing $150 million, which was scheduled to help persons with disabilities to access jobs. The minister is supposed to be committed to the full inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of life. Can she explain how these cuts make Canada more inclusive and help disabled Canadians to find jobs?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
I commend to the member opposite the report that was filed yesterday by the Minister of Finance's Committee on Disabilities. For the first time in the history of this country, we now have a potential initiative that will help parents with children with severe disabilities to save for their future. Something your government could have done over the course of 13 years, which we have now done in the course of 10 months.
Honourable member for York Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard for students with disabilities, hard for them to qualify for college or university, hard for their families who are often low income because one parent had to stay home to offer the extra care. So we as a government put in $550 million over 5 years to help them. Money that was locked in, guaranteed that if we were the government today, would be in these students' pockets. Instead, Canada's new government, new, ungenerous, small, pinch government, has done what it takes pride in doing, delivering cuts. These kids have fought hard to get their chance, Mr. Speaker. Why?
Order. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, what we need to know is where they locked up the money. In what brown bag did they lock up the money? Is it in the hands of their bookie, Alfonso Galeano? We don't know where you locked up the money. Which set of books were you using? The first set, the second set, or the third set? No, we'd rather do something, actually do something for people with disabilities, and we will.
The Honourable member for Yukon.
Well, students were really shut out with that answer. Mr. Speaker, the only minority the Conservatives care about is their own minority government. Yesterday, the Minister for the Status of Women defended her scandalous decision to close offices across the country by claiming those in remote and rural communities can access programs via the Internet. We now know that the mean-spirited Conservative government is cutting $100 million from rural and Aboriginal broadband. The minister tells women to access their programs from the Internet and then cuts the Internet funding. Will the minister give a real answer today as how rural women will access her programs?
The Honourable the Minister of... Order. I believe we're now going to hear from the Honourable the President of the Treasury Board.
If there could be no better example, so many members of this cabinet wanted to stand up for women and speak about it in this House today. Mr. Speaker, the reductions that the member opposite talks about are very clearly and very specifically decisions to sunset this program tabled by the former Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. Women in remote and rural Canada deserve better, Mr. Speaker, and on January the 23rd, they elected better.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lillé, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, The decision of the Minister of Industry to accelerate deregulation is going to help certain companies to dominate the market and monopolize it. The process was a flawed one. Will the Minister admit that he was wrong? And will he make sure that we don't have monopolies that get rid of all competition? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, here's what the President of HoC had to say yesterday. Thanks to low operating costs, HoC will be able to face competition and offer lower cases. HoC, like all telecom companies, is ready to take on competition, and there will be lower prices which will benefit consumers. The Honourable Member, I think that there were people who have spoken against deregulation. There were no consultations. They're giving 30 days to people during the holiday season to submit their opinions in writing. This is a farce, Mr. Speaker. If this minister is serious about consulting, I would challenge him to hold public hearings. Is he ready to take that challenge? To listen to people who are against the savage deregulation he is proposing? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have here Mr. Shaw from Shaw Communications, who says about our reform
that the interests of consumers must come first, and that's what you're doing, Mr. President. We are doing that for Canadians. They're going to benefit from more competition, lower prices, and best services.
L'Honorable Député de Quebec.
The Honourable Member for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, we were talking yesterday about funding the Science Centre in Quebec City. The Minister said he would make sure that the project was viable and that it would be able to be funded year in, year out. Why is he waiting to fund it when they don't make the same demands on other science centres in Canada, such as in Newfoundland? Why is there this double standard? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, I think that we're a little too close to Christmas and perhaps people simply aren't understanding. This science centre is asking for $55 million. If we're going to go forward with this, then this money will allow to build the building. That will cost $30 million, and then there will be funding. But the study has to prove to us that this centre will be viable and will be able to bear its own operating costs. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, we've learned that the $55 million promised for a young people's program will affect young people in organizations in regions. They will be cutting into the program, and this while the committee asks for the program to be improved. The Honourable Minister for Human Resources and Social Development.
It's true that we did commit when we were elected to reviewing all programs that were run by the previous government to make sure that they were offering value for Canadian taxpayers' money. And in that process, Mr. Speaker, we're looking for opportunities for improvement, and we hope to be able to announce some.
The Honourable Member for Kings Hants.
Mr. Speaker, the Community Action Program for Children and the Canada Prenatal Nutrition Program provide essential services to low-income and single-parent Canadian families. Will the government today commit to low-income families in hundreds of Canadian communities, children who need these programs, that they will not be left out in the cold by more heartless neoconservative cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to answer the question from the Honourable Member that the Community Access Program, it's a program that was sunsetting the 31st of December. But right now, Mr. Speaker, we're working on that, and I can assure that all the community will have access to the internet and to the broadband.
The honourable member for North Vancouver. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, the inexplicable cuts of this mean-spirited, ideological government continues to baffle Canadians. The cuts have hurt Canada's ability to be competitive in a global market. $250 million for the Global Success Fund, $109 million for our trade commissioners, $60 million to showcase Canada to the world. All gone, 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 gone. These cuts will hurt our Pacific Gateway strategy to grow import-export business across Canada. Why is this government determined to dismantle our strong economy by crippling business?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Well, we know there was a wish list and there were several sets of books, 3 at least, from the previous government. And one other thing we know for sure, that there was $40 million of tax-paid money by hard-working Canadians that is gone, 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 gone.
The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence. Bravo. Bravo. The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence is very popular, but he's here to ask a question today, and we all want to hear the question, and we don't want to waste time. The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence has the floor.
And allow me to wish them all a Merry Christmas.
Mr. Speaker, according to various scientific studies, the government has cut all initiatives to encourage the participation of citizens in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Energuide was cut. Why? Is this government asking the public to act while it's cutting all the tools and programs available to them to do this? The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Department, there were literally hundreds of programs. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And what did Canadians get for that? Greenhouse gases skyrocketed under the watch of that government. Under the leader of the Liberal Party, he spent 10 years at the cabinet table when all those decisions were being made. He ended at the cabinet table as Minister of Environment. And what did Canadians get for those programs? They got nothing. They got nothing in greenhouse gas reductions. Pollution's increased, Mr. Speaker. Our programs will deliver results for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, the National Initiative for the Homeless will end the 31st of March next, but the Conservative government, this minority government, is refusing to renew the program. In Laval, the association called Agape has been trying to renovate buildings to house the homeless. There had been help for people to help create new places in these establishments. How can the government refuse to help the homeless? The Honourable Member of Human Resources and Social Development.
As usual, are just the opposite from what the Liberals have presented. This government cares very much about helping the homeless. That's why one of our very first actions was to spend the full amount of money and renew the amount of money that was in the budget, almost $135 million, to help those who are most unfortunate and need to find new homes because they're homeless. We also added $37 million that the previous government didn't see fit to spend on the homeless. But
the Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, the old Liberal government never tackled the problem of modernizing the fishing industry, in spite of repeated requests from the provinces and others. Strong conservation and protection measures are needed to ensure the sustainability of marine resources. Mr. Speaker, the Fisheries Act of 1868 needs to be overhauled. Can the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans update the House on his plans for a new Fisheries Act?
Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank the Honourable Member for his question and assure him
This government is very supportive of conservation. This government is also will ensure political accountability. This government will protect our fish stocks. The Act is 138 years old, Mr. Speaker, part of the coastline that wasn't even in Confederation when it was brought in. That's why today, Mr. Speaker, I'll be tabling the new Fisheries Act.
The honourable member for Surrey North.
This Prime Minister promised patient wait time guarantees would be one of his government's key commitments. But since the election, this Minister of Health has been invisible and ineffective. The Wait Time Alliance today reminded the Conservatives about their most famous broken promise. There are only 18 days left to announce a meaningful commitment to Canadians who are waiting for treatment and surgery. Will the Minister of Health make an early New Year's resolution and pledge to meet his own deadline of December the 31st?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for the question. And indeed, this is about wait time targets, I would remind the Honourable Member. And indeed, all 10 provinces are already either meeting the accelerated deadline or well on their way to doing so. Indeed, 3 have already announced the targets that she's referring to. 3 have indicated they will do so very soon. 2 are working on targets they already established in 2004, and 2 have indicated they are using common benchmarks, Mr. Speaker. Another promise we've made, another promise kept.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Surrey North.
Clock keeps ticking, and time is running out for this Minister of Health. The minor pilot projects he's announced so far are not what Canadians had in mind when they were promised reduced wait times across the board. That's why the Wait Time Alliance report card in November gave the Conservatives a D for failing to establish a timetable for achieving targets. Will the Minister of Health ever keep the promise made during the last campaign, or should Canadians expect another lump of coal from the Conservative in their Christmas stocking?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the targets are on target, and indeed, this government showed leadership for this country by establishing the 2 first wait time guarantees in the history of this country, both on reserve, both targeting people at risk, whether it becomes prenatal care or diabetes care, Mr. Speaker. We are leading by example. If the honourable member cares so much about it, she should resign her seat, run for the provincial legislature, get elected to the government of British Columbia, and establish the targets with the government of Canada, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Paul's.
Mr. Speaker, the women of Canada are angry. They even have a website, thewomenarangry.org. Before, the minister responsible said she was cutting waste. Now she says there are no cuts. The women are angry because, indeed, $5 million has been cut. Now we learn that the individual Conservative MPs have offered funding to the shelters and transition houses in their Conservative ridings from a slush fund resulting from these non-cuts, as long as they promise to shut up. Can the Prime Minister tell this House how he can defend this blatant act of political favoritism?
Order. The Honourable the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Order.
Well,
what was that?
Mr. Speaker, I'm almost speechless. I mean, that amount of falsity, misconception of this government. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about this government compared to the former Liberal government. This government does not have a boys' weekend to develop policy. This government doesn't have a ladies' lunch to come up with a pink book. This government does not appoint women to run in politics. This government says every woman will earn their nomination from the grassroots in every riding across
The Honourable Member for Richmond Hill. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, Liberal attempts to build a just society have been attacked, torn apart, and left in ruins by this mean-spirited ideological government. The Communities and Institutional Building Program provided incentives to commercial businesses and public institutions to improve the energy efficiency of buildings across this country. This government simply didn't care. With a stroke of a pen, it eliminated $78 million of funding
Why won't the Minister of Natural Resources help Canada's workplaces and make them more energy efficient and give us a real answer for a change?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts are the facts. The facts are that you spent hundreds of millions of taxpayers' money, and what are the results? What are the results? The results are, by your own numbers, that greenhouse gases are up 35% above your own targets. You never reduced any type of pollutants out of the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker. They did nothing. The truth is, your record is pathetic on the...
I know the Honourable Minister of Natural Resources will remember the next time he answers a question he's going to address the chair, because I don't think he meant my record. The Honourable Member for Churchill.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' $50 million cut to the Canada Health Infoway shows how little this government cares about public health care. It is the key to better service because it allows for standard electronic health records, telehealth, and public health surveillance. These programs are critical for care, especially in rural and northern Canada, and play an integral part in reducing wait times. Why is the Minister of Health tearing apart a program that provides quality and uniform access to public health care for all Canadians?
Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member is incorrect. In fact, we are fully funding Canada Health Infoway. We considered a key component of this government's agenda for electronic health records. So I encourage the Honourable Member to check your facts. We, in fact, are delivering on our healthcare promises. After 13 years of power, Mr. Speaker, the former government, this Liberal Party, made a whole lot of promises on healthcare, and wait times were doubled, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga, Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, this government doesn't care about young Canadians learning about the rest of the world. In fact, the only minority it cares about is its mean-spirited, fragile minority government. The Liberal government booked $150 million for scholarships to send Canadian youth abroad to study and bring the best and brightest from around the world to study at Canadian universities. Yet, because of their mean-spirited and ideological cuts, the current government is systematically dismantling opportunities for young Canadians. How can this government be so short-sighted?
The Right Honourable, the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened with some amusement in this question period to all this line of questioning, which seems to be, you broke our promises. Let me assure you, Mr. Speaker, that these promises were broken by the Liberal Party long before we got to office. And if the Liberal Party is ever going to return to office, it has to be honest about its past and honest with Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. On December 15th, General Dynamics will be taking over SNC-Tech. During negotiations, there were serious reservations expressed because of the Patriot Act, under the Patriot Act, and because of for protecting people's private information. Can the Prime Minister tell us that the private information about workers will be protected from the American Patriot Act? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague. Personal information is very important for the people of Canada, and it is up to the Government of Canada to put all measures necessary in place to protect this information. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, the competition of emerging countries has led to job losses in the furniture industry. The Bloc Québécois for years has been asking the government to bring in an assistance plan to help people to adjust to the changes. Will the Minister of Industry make public in the short term his plan to assist industry so they can face this new reality? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, I believe that my colleague hasn't read our last budget. We cut taxes for all Canadians and businesses to allow them to be more competitive. And as concerns textiles, in particular, I can say, yes, Mr. Speaker, this government will be helping the textile industry and workers.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative government's recent cuts to literacy are no way to build a country. In Cape Breton and across Canada, our government invested to tackle literacy rates, supporting groups like the Learning Centre in Cape Breton. Will the Minister of Cuts to Human Resources and Social Development apologise to the 6,000 adult Nova Scotians currently in literacy programs and reinstate the money she took away?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources and Social Development has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's the former Liberal government that owes the apologies to Canadians. They're the ones. Mr. Speaker, they're the ones that paid groups $750 a day to program a website. They're the ones, Mr. Speaker, that paid $150,000 to an executive director. Mr. Speaker, they're the ones that paid one group $34,000 to design a logo when we're trying to help adults read letters, not pictures.
Honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Mr. Speaker, rural constituents in my riding have told me that their mail delivery is a mess. Canadians depend upon reliable, timely delivery of their mail, regardless of where they live. Rural Canadians are worried about changes to rural mail delivery being undertaken by Canada Post. Can the minister responsible for Canada Post update the House on rural mail delivery and remailers?
Honourable the Minister of Transport. Order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's an excellent question from my colleague. Both rural mail delivery and, of course, international remailers, Mr. Speaker, are very important issues in Canada's new government. And Canada's new government is issuing a directive today to Canada Post. First, the government has determined and decided to maintain traditional rural mail delivery for all Canadians from coast to coast. Second of all, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the international remailers, I will review the span and the scope of the problem, and we will examine options legislative.
L'honorable député d'Acadie.
The honourable member for Acadie Bathurst. Mr. Speaker, on September 25th, the Conservative government announced the elimination of the court challenges program. This decision was not debated, there was no consultation, and it runs counter to the Official Languages Act. From St. John's to Vancouver, people in French-speaking communities have appeared before the Official Languages Committee, and they know that the development of their communities is at stake. Will the President of the Treasury Board finally listen to Franco-Canadians and bring back the Court Challenges program, yes or no? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, it's very important to underscore this party and our government's support for the Official Languages Act. It's very important that there be services in every province in both languages. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, if there are French language schools across the country, it's not because of the Liberals, but because of the Court Challenges program. It helped people to have the infrastructure they need to live in French. Will the Conservative government bring back the Court Challenges program so they can help bring back the infrastructure these communities need? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to support our language communities in various regions of Canada. We are strong supporters of the Official Languages Act, and the Commissioner has stated this importance.
The Honourable tabling of documents, the Honourable the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36.8, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 3 petitions.
Order à l'ordre. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. Introduction of government bills. Mr. Nicholson, seconded by Mr. Solberg, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Consultations with Electors on their preferences for appointments to the Senate. Cette motion est réputée adoptée.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Nicholson, seconded by Mr. Solberg, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. Cette motion est réputée.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Lecture de ce projet de loi, first reading of this bill.
Projet de loi.
When shall this bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House.
Prentice, seconded by Mr. Taves, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Canadian Human Rights Act. Cette motion est réputée adoptée.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Mr.
Prentice, seconded by Mr. Faudet, moves that the bill be now read a first time and printed.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
Quand ce projet de loi.
When shall this bill be read a second time?
Sitting of the House. Mr. Hearn, seconded by Mr. Taves, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Sustainable Development of Canada's Seacoast and Inland Fisheries. Cette motion est réputée adoptée.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Appuyé par
Mr. Hearn, seconded by Mr. Taves, moves that the bill be now read a first time and printed.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Première lecture de ce projet de loi, first reading of this bill.
When shall the bill be read a second time? À la prochaine séance.
At the next sitting of the House.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
For Scarborough Southwest. Order, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 34.1, I have the honour to present to the House in both official languages the report of the Canadian delegation of the Canada-China Legislative Association respecting its participation in the 9th bilateral consultations held in Beijing, Guangzhou, Macau, and Hong Kong from October 7th to October 15th, 2006. And I encourage the government to review this report of one of our major and important trading partners so that we have an excellent relationship with the People's Republic of China. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 34.1, I have the honour to present to the House in both official languages the report of the Canadian Interparliamentary Delegation to the Interparliamentary Forum of the Americas, Canadian section, respecting its participation in the 5th plenary meeting of the Interparliamentary Forum of the Americas held in Bogota, Colombia from November 19th to 21st, 2006.
L'Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 34.1, I have the honour to present in both official languages the report of the Canada-Africa Parliamentary Association concerning its participation in the election observation mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo from July 28 to August 1st, 2006.
Parlementaire.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Northeast.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the 6th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, which deals with the issue of solicitation laws. I would like to thank the members of this committee, the chairman, the subcommittee I should say, the chairman and all the clerks and analysts for their very hard work on finalizing this report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to present the 3rd report of the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Mr. Speaker, the committee examined the qualifications and competence of the nominee and agreed that the nomination of Robert Marlow as Information Commissioner of Canada be concurred in, and it was unanimous.
Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Léonard Saint-Michel. I have the honour to present in both official languages the 9th report of the Standing Committee on Finance entitled Parliamentary Review of the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency Act, a value proposition or a failed experiment.
Standing Order 108-2 and Section 89 of the Canada Revenue Agency Act. Your committee has studied the statutory review of the first 5 years of the Canada Revenue Agency Act. And in closing, I'd just like to thank all the people that made this possible, because we've been working on this for the last 2 parliamentary sessions. I want to thank the research staff and, of course, the clerks and the translator for getting the report out in 24 hours. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the 9th report of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, and I want to thank all members of the committee for their cooperation, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
And estimates. Mr. Speaker, the committee has considered the matter of implementation of accrual budgeting and appropriations in the federal government. And may I say that this report was passed unanimously by all parties who worked on this report, and I want to thank everyone for doing such great work, and we wish to report this to the House of Commons. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vegreville-Wainwright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the duty to present in both official languages the 5th report of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, your committee considered the subject of textile and clothing industry in Canada and agreed to present the following report to the House.
The Honourable Member for Cambridge.
I have the honour to present the 26th report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs.
Reference of Tuesday, November 8, 2006, Bill C-31, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and the Public Service Employment Act.
Mr. Speaker, the committee examined the bill C-31 and reports the bill with amendment.
Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour today, pursuant to Standing Order 102, to present reports 7 through 10 from the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Suffice to say, we've been busy as little beavers in that committee, Mr. Speaker. 4 reports at a time. It's just unprecedented in this House. At this time, I'd like to thank everyone for the super job they've done getting this work done, the clerks, the researchers, all the members of the committee, all the best wishes of the season. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Crowfoot.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour today to present in both official languages 2 reports. First of all, the 4th report on the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in relation to its study on Canada's role in complex international interventions that involve multiple foreign policy instruments focusing on Canada's efforts in Haiti. And, Mr. Speaker, as others in the past, I wish all our clerks and everyone that has worked on this report a very Merry Christmas. Mr. Speaker, I also have the privilege and the honor to present in both official languages the fifth report of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in relation to the government's whole of government strategy for failed states. And Mr. Speaker, I would also wish you a very Merry Christmas and all the best.
That's nice.
The honourable member is too kind. The honourable member for Edmonton-Leduc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the fourth report of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology regarding its order of reference of Monday, November 6, 2006, Bill C-26, an act to amend the Criminal Code, criminal interest rate. Mr. Speaker, the committee has considered Bill C-26 and reports the bill without amendment. Thank you and Merry Christmas, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Brandon-Souris.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the third report of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities.
Order of reference of Thursday, September 21st, 2006, the committee has considered and held hearings on the subject matter of Bill C-11, an act to amend the Canada Transport and Transportation Act and the Railway Safety Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts, and agreed on Tuesday, December 12th, 2006, to report it with amendments. Thank you.
Good. The honourable
member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the fourth report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees.
Vraiment, nous sommes finis?
We've really finished?
Private members' bills. Première lecture de projet de loi.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Provide access to information under the control of the Government of Canada, Chapter A1 of the Revised Statutes of Canada, 1985. This House approved the appointment of Robert Marlowe as Information Commissioner.
Hear, hear. Does he need to give an Mr. Nicholson, seconded by Mr. Van Loan, moves that in accordance with Section 54(1) of the Act to extend the present laws of Canada that provide access to information under the control of the Government of Canada, Chapter A1 of the Revised Statutes of Canada, 1985, this House approved the appointment of Robert Marlowe as Information Commissioner. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Carried? D'accord. Adopté. The Honourable, the
Carried.
House Leader on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I think you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion, that the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities be the committee for the purposes of Section 44 of the Employment Equity Act.
Does the Honourable, the Government House Leader, have the unanimous consent of the House to propose this motion? La Chambre l'a entendu.
The House has heard the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Carried.
The Government House Leader on another point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think you'll also find consent for the following, that notwithstanding the orders made on Tuesday, April 25, 2006, and Thursday, June 22, 2006, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security be authorized to continue its deliberations relating to its review of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2001 beyond December 22, 2006, and to present its final report no later than February 28, 2007.
Does the Honourable, the Government House Leader, have the unanimous consent of the House to propose this motion? La Chambre l'a entendu.
The House has heard the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt it? Agreed? Carried.
Fini?
Is that it?
So do I. Okay. Motion.
Motions? Presenting petitions.
Member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two petitions. The first one is from 170 petitioners in the Scarborough, Ontario area, and they call upon Parliament to take measures necessary to immediately raise the age of consent from 14, that's sexual consent, from age 14 to 16 years of age. A second petition from petitioners also in the Scarborough area involving some 70 persons calls upon Parliament to repeal or amend the Marriage for Civil Purposes Act in order to promote and defend marriage as the lawful union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Nepean Carleton.
I have the honor to present a petition with respect to traditional marriage.
Petition which calls upon the government to reflect the accurate definition of the word marriage as being a relationship between one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others, while retaining all similar civil benefits for same-sex couples. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Montmorency, Charlevoix. I thought he was rising to present a petition. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. I am tabling a petition which deals with suppression by the police in Mexico and the state of Ohio. The petition denounces the climate of terror that reigns in this region. This petition asks the House of Commons to look into the situation and to put pressure so that the labor dispute will be resolved. I would also like to thank Ms. Sylvie Dussault, who is the author of this petition, and I will tell her that she has my support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Calling for the CAW drive. It's a petition to the Government of Canada for a new automotive trade policy, Mr. Speaker. They're concerned that we've entering this agreement, we're losing more automotive jobs, and calling upon the Government of Canada finally to deliver an automotive policy, and second to that, to make sure that Canada does not enter into a lopsided Korea trade deal that costs more Canadian manufacturing jobs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for York West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to table a petition this afternoon containing names from residents in my riding of York West and the surrounding GTA. The petitioners recognize that religious persecution is an international crisis affecting many religious groups in countless countries of the world, and that the persecution of groups for their religious beliefs is immoral, unjust, and violates an individual's fundamental right to religious freedom. The petitioners call upon the federal government to develop an automatic array of interventions that may be imposed by Canada against foreign governments such as Iraq that may support religious persecution or fail to prevent it, and to improve measures for refugees who have suffered religious persecution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Standing Order 36, I have the privilege of presenting this petition on behalf of my constituents. There are hundreds of names here calling on the government to amend the criminal code to lengthen the sentencing for dangerous offenders, especially pedophile offenders.
L'Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie, Île-la-Madeleine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm tabling a petition, another petition, but not necessarily the last petition, from people in the riding of Gaspésie, Haute-la-Madeleine, who asking the federal government to take the necessary steps to maintain and improve rail services both for passengers and cargo, meaning that we need to purchase the Matapatia branch line and we need to increase the Via Rail's operational budget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to table today a petition signed by over 7,200 Canadians and residents of Canada who call on the government to demonstrate its commitment to international law and the treaties to which it is a signatory by making a provision for U.S. war objectors to have sanctuary in this country. They note that in the past, notably during the Vietnam War, Canada, as a matter of official policy, did provide refuge from militarism for over 50,000 Americans who refused to serve in an immoral war. They assert that those Americans who are now refusing to fight in the illegal war in Iraq are people of great conscience, that the majority of Canadians do not support the illegal war in Iraq, that the Government of Canada did not support the war in Iraq, and that the war resistors should receive a welcome in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Ajax Pickering.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege of presenting a petition signed by 248 congregants of the Pickering Village United Church on the subject of HIV/AIDS in Africa. The petition calls upon the Government of Canada to expedite the production and export of antiretroviral drugs to Africa. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Vegreville Wainwright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour indeed to present this petition on behalf of constituents and other Canadians. The petitioners call upon Parliament to enact legislation which would recognize unborn children as separate victims of crime when they are injured or killed during the commission of an offence against their mothers, therefore allowing 2 charges to be laid in such a situation instead of 1. This has stemmed, Mr. Speaker, from the situation with Olivia Talbot of Edmonton, who was shot and killed in November 2005, and her 27-year-old unborn son, Lane Jr., was also killed in that incident. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Député de Jean-Lebert.
The Honourable Member for Jean-Lebert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to table a petition from citizens in my riding who are protesting against the shutdown of rural postal stations in Canada. For several years, Post Canada has been privatizing its service, its client services, by transferring it to sales points in the private sector. It began under the Liberals, and my people in my riding are upset to realize that this is continuing under the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to rise today in the House and present a petition on behalf of 290 members from my constituency and also from Summerside PEI, supporting Remembrance Day as a national holiday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Député de Saint-Boniface.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Boniface.
I rise today to table a petition signed by 25 of my constituents. These constituents are claiming that the existing law regarding the age of sexual consent remains at 14 years of age. They're saying that Bill C-22 is tabled to raise the age of consent from 14 to 16 years, and this petition lobbies the federal government to raise the age from sexual consent to 18 years of age. Thank you.
Member for Winnipeg North.
Speaker, I'm pleased to present 3 petitions. 2 have to do with a long-standing matter before this House. That is the question of alcohol beverage containers and labels on them indicating that drinking during pregnancy can be dangerous, and it's a motion that was passed by Parliament and is still awaiting action, and these petitioners want to see the government act on what Parliament has adopted. Mr. Speaker, the other petition is one that refers to the new automotive trade policy. It is a petition that many New Democrats have signed and presented to this House, and it calls for the cancellation of negotiations for a free trade agreement with Korea and the development of a new automotive trade policy.
The Honourable Member for Peace River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 4 petitions today that I'd like to present. One is from a group of people in Manitoba. 568 people have called on this House or called on this government to make it illegal for Internet service providers to allow child pornography on its sites. The next petition that I'm going to bring is 209 constituents of mine that are asking the government to do everything in their power to limit child abuse, pornography and child trafficking, and to ensure that Internet luring does not happen. The third petition is signed by 388 constituents of mine that are asking the government, calling on the government to raise the age of consent from 14 to 16 years old. And my final petition today is 249 signatures from my constituency that are asking for the government to use all necessary means to limit child trafficking, Internet luring, child prostitution, and to raise the age of consent from 14 to 16. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Brant.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present 3 petitions which are identical. The many signatories to the 3 petitions, Mr. Speaker, calling upon the Government of Canada to cancel negotiations for a free trade agreement with Korea, which would worsen the already one-way flood of automotive products onto the Canadian market. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Député de Brome.
The Honourable Member for Brome, Missisquoi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleagues from various regions for this petition, which comes from a group of associations working with the homeless. Once again, the petition is asking the government to reinstate the Skippy program, which is with respect to the homeless. We need a subsidy program that is flexible and recurring, which will enable community organizations to use all of their creativity and on a long-term basis, and to look into the causes of homelessness, specifically in the region, in my region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pleasure and an honor to present a petition by residents of Ottawa, over 600. They're calling on the government to make sure to commit and state funding in the upcoming budget for the homeless initiative for the next 5 years. It's also a pleasure and an honor to present a petition from constituents on the situation in northern Uganda, calling on Canada to take leadership in the UN on this issue and to support the people who are living in misery in northern Uganda. Thank you, Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too have the honour today to table a petition on behalf of 57 of my constituents, the Kelowna Lake Country, who draw to the attention of the government the situation in northern Uganda as well regarding the child soldiers. Children cannot speak for themselves. They need each one of us here to help them. I think you agree, Mr. Speaker, that no one child should face the threat of being kidnapped and forced to fight in war. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure to present a petition today. It was brought to my attention by a constituent of mine, Mr. David McDonald, who his cousin's son was brutally attacked and murdered at a house party, and the sentences received were minimal, and his concern is shared by many people in my riding, especially in light of the McAvoy report and Justice Merlin Nunn last week. And they are calling upon the undersigned to reevaluate the sentences handed to criminals and ensure that sentences are adequate in comparison to the crime, regardless of age, class, or race. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to present two petitions on behalf of the citizens of Edmonton Centre. The first calls on the government and Parliament to urge the Chinese regime to end the persecution of Falun Gong and release all Falun Gong practitioners immediately, to take active measures to help stop mass killing and organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, and to discourage Canadians from travelling to China for organ transplants. The second petition urges the Government of Canada, assembled in Parliament, to take all measures necessary to immediately raise the age of consent from 14 to 16 years of age.
Yes. The Honourable Member for Oak Ridges Markham.
The petitioners from Oak Ridges Markham urge the Government of Canada to send a strong message to the Government of Sri Lanka to cease in military offensive immediately and to allow international relief agencies to enter Tamil areas to provide humanitarian aid to the affected civilian population, to stop shelling and bombing civilian habitats, to allow international monitors to investigate the massacres of Tamil aid workers as well. Thank you. And a Merry Christmas.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. I'd like to table a petition signed by 2011 young Canadians who have made a commitment to volunteer and ask the government to ensure that volunteer activities can be carried out more easily.
For Vancouver East.
I have three petitions to present, one from residents who are very concerned over the senseless bombings of 61 schoolgirls in an orphanage in Sri Lanka and the massacre of 17 Tamil volunteer workers who belonged to the Paris-based International Action Against Famine. The petitioners call upon the government to pressure the government of Sri Lanka to allow international relief agencies to enter Tamil areas to provide basic food and medicine to civilian populations. Mr. Speaker, there's a second petition from people who are very concerned that the Canada social transfer be strengthened to redress poverty, especially amongst women, and to transform our income security systems and to improve social programs. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, from residents of Quebec who are very concerned that Canada has fallen so far behind in meeting its targets for Kyoto, and calls on this government to reconsider its decision about Kyoto and to meet its international obligations in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Leduc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour today to present two petitions on behalf of people of my riding. The first group of petitioners call upon this Parliament to immediately raise the age of sexual consent from 14 to 16 years of age. And Mr. Speaker, the second group of petitioners call upon this government and this Parliament to investigate the treatment of Falun Gong petitioners in China. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the honourable member for Edmonton-Leduc for his patience. Petitions, présentation de pétition. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, questions number 1, Q112 and Q114 could be made orders for returns. These returns would be tabled immediately.
Is it agreed that questions Q112 and Q114 be made orders for return? Agreed. Agreed. The Honourable, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand.
Agreed. Agreed. Avis de motion portant production.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government.
I ask that all notices of motions for the production of papers be allowed to stand.
Agreed. Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day.
Government orders.
Government business motion number 13, pre-budget consultations.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The Honourable member.
Resuming debate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to speak to the pre-budget consultation report of the Standing Committee of Finance. I want to begin, Mr. Speaker, by thanking the literally thousands of Canadians that presented or attended pre-budget consultations that were held both here in Ottawa as well as right across the country. Writing a budget is obviously about making choices. Everyday average Canadians are making choices about what they can and cannot afford. The Government of Canada is no different. The demand for funding is virtually infinite, Mr. Speaker, but resources of government are not. Mr. Speaker, I believe that Canadians pay too much in taxes, and I believe that these high taxes are seriously impacting on Canada's overall competitiveness in a very negative way. In this regard, several of the presentations made to the committee stood out to me, and Mr. Speaker, I would like to take some time to share those with the House. With respect to productivity, Roger Martin, Dean of the Rotman School of Management, spoke to the failings of the previous government in addressing competitiveness through their budgetary planning. He in fact pointed out that in 1998, Canada stood 6th in the international ranking of competitiveness. In 2001, we stood 11th. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have fallen to 16th.
Shame.
Over the years, we have drifted down in the rankings as countries like Norway and Japan have stepped up their competitiveness. These words came back to me when the Finance Minister appeared before the committee and presented the fiscal update titled Advantage Canada. I was encouraged to hear of the 5 Canadian advantages that the plan specifically outlined, and I'll share those with the House. To begin with, the Finance Minister spoke of a tax advantage, and this is important, Mr. Speaker. Canada's tax advantage will reduce taxes for all Canadians and establish the lowest tax rate on new business investment in the G7. We have got to attract investment, Mr. Speaker. We've all heard of manufacturing jobs that are potentially leaving Canada and going elsewhere. Well, this government wants to stem that flow. We, in fact, want to encourage new investment and build industry, build business. The second point that he spoke of was the fiscal advantage. Canada's fiscal advantage will eliminate Canada's total government net debt in less than a generation, creating a strong foundation on which to build sustainable prosperity. And I note today, Mr. Speaker, the International Monetary Fund came out and specifically commended the Finance Minister for this commitment and the commitment of this government. And I'd like to read a little bit of what the IMF said in their statement. It reads, the International Monetary Fund endorsed Canada's strategy to use surplus revenue to become the first group of 7 nations, the first of the group of 7 nations whose outstanding debt doesn't exceed its assets.
That's incredible.
I mean, this speaks to the determination and the incredible accomplishment that this government has promised. We haven't talked about it. We've promised it to Canadians by 2021. It further goes on to read that the Canadian fiscal strategy appropriately highlights the joint role of public pension plans and provincial territorial governments in achieving a sustainable fiscal position. Further down it reads, Canada would join countries including Australia, Norway, Finland that have eliminated their net debt, based on figures from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Funny, Mr. Speaker, I believe I just mentioned some of those nations when I was speaking about nations that have improved their productivity. That speaks to the importance of eliminating the net debt. The third point was the entrepreneurial advantage. It reads that Canada's entrepreneurial advantage will reduce unnecessary regulation, red tape, and lower taxes to unlock business investment. Well, we heard about this time and time again. Groups like the Canadian Federation of Independent Business came forward and said, government simply must get out of the way. We can do better. We can employ more. We could pay more. We could grow if government would take the reins that are holding us back away. Reduce the red tape. This is incredibly, this type of announcement was welcomed by businesses. I know my own Chamber of Commerce in Peterborough, and I understand the Chamber of Commerce in places like St. Catharines, Burlington, and even right across this country have came out and said this is exactly what we need.
Well said.
The fourth point spoke to a knowledge advantage. And when we talk about a knowledge advantage, what we're talking about is creating the best educated, best, most skilled workforce in the world. A flexible workforce. A workforce that can move and that can address the needs of a growing, expanding economy. Canada is an emerging world economic superpower. We are an energy superpower, and we need the workforce that will address that. Well, that's what the knowledge advantage speaks to, Mr. Speaker. And I was delighted. You know, there are a number of items that, you know, as a group on the committee, we don't always agree on. But if there was one thing we did agree on, was that we need to invest in education. And I see my colleague, the member from Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, is here. And I know that this is one thing that we agree on, a dedicated transfer for post-secondary education. And we feel that this is incredibly important, to take this out of the social transfer, to tag that money and give it to the provinces so they understand that this money is for post-secondary education. We want to improve access. We want to improve affordability. We want to improve the overall quality of education, because it's not just important that people can get in to be schooled. They also have to get a quality education. And the other thing, Mr. Speaker, that we need to address is skilled trades, because when we speak of post-secondary education, that is education in all its forms, not just what we get at college and university, but it's the type of education that you would get after high school. And we need to encourage more skilled trades in this country. We have a terrible deficit, so the knowledge advantage is so incredibly important to moving Canada forward. And lastly, the infrastructure advantage, Mr. Speaker. Canada's infrastructure advantage will create modern, world-class infrastructure to ensure the seamless flow of people, goods and services across our roads and bridges, through our ports and gateways, via our public transit. Once again, we know that that Canada has changed a great deal over the last number of years, Mr. Speaker. And when we speak about public transit and the need for public transit, well, we're talking about being good to the environment. We're talking about being responsible as to the amount of traffic, and we're talking about improving the flow of goods. The Pacific Gateway, for example, an enormous undertaking of this government, will really open up that Asian Pacific market and really allow for economic growth for Canada. And it's part of the infrastructure improvements that we're undertaking. Advantage Canada was focused on 4 core principles, and I'd like to review those with the House as well. The principles are focusing government. Government should be focused on what it does best, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what this government intends to do. We're going to be responsible in how we spend. and effective in our operations, effective in our results, and accountable to taxpayers. I mean, overall, Mr. Speaker, we hear often from the opposition that we're being very narrow. Well, there's a big difference between being narrow, quite frankly, and being focused. You shouldn't confuse the two. I mean, focus will help you accomplish your objectives. And that has nothing to do with being narrow. And I think that Canadians understand that and appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. The second point was creating new opportunities and choices for people. And under that heading, Mr. Speaker, it speaks to government's creation of incentives for people to excel right here at home in Canada. We'll reduce taxes, invest in education, training, and transition to work on opportunities so that Canadians can achieve their potential. And again, Mr. Speaker, we often hear of a welfare wall in Canada, and we want to help people get over that welfare wall. We want to reduce the gap that has expanded between rich and poor and provide more opportunity. We want everybody to be able to dream and to vision themselves getting further ahead. And that's, that is so incredibly important to this government.
Well said. Well said.
We want to invest for sustainable growth. And under this heading, we're talking about government investing and seeking partnerships with both the provinces and the private sector, so-called P3 strategic investments, Mr. Speaker. These types of P3 investments can help us be very efficient, but we're not only going to go with P3 investments for growth, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to look at them where it makes sense. That's the way that we'll go. And I know in Peterborough, I've got a number of issues that I believe are absolutely critical for my riding, and they would be P3 investments. And I speak to passenger rail service for Peterborough and improving the rail line that connects Peterborough to the GTA. I speak of Highway 407. A highway currently also called the ETR, or Express Toll Route. That highway, when it comes through to Highway 115, Mr. Speaker, will dramatically improve Peterborough's opportunity, indeed our entire region's opportunity for economic expansion. These are both P3 operations. And lastly, the other thing that I'm quite excited about was the announcement with respect to the Windsor border that was in Advantage Canada. As we know, the Detroit-Windsor crossing is the busiest crossing between Canada and the United States. Nothing has been done on that file for a long time, even though there has been demand for some 40 years to improve that border crossing. Advantage Canada made a commitment to improve that crossing by 2012, and that will mean tremendous benefit to that entire, not just the Windsor area, but all of southwestern and central Ontario and Canada's overall gross domestic product. We also talked about freeing business to grow and succeed. And again, this is what I alluded to when I talked about removing the reins from business. So what we need to do is create an atmosphere. Government doesn't necessarily have to create the economy, but what we have to do is create an atmosphere where that economy can flourish. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about freeing business to grow and succeed. Mr. Speaker, I think we can all agree that Advantage Canada is a focused plan that will specifically help our nation reestablish itself as a world leader in competitiveness. This will help us attract foreign investment, attract new industry, and provide good, paying, meaningful employment for Canadians and improve the overall quality of life for Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to refer a little bit to the report, if I could, that was put together by the Finance Committee. And I'm going to refer to a couple of specific examples that are in the report. I think it's important to recognize that the Government of Canada has made significant strides already towards improving Canada's overall productivity in our first budget, Budget 2006. Indeed, we announced a number of tax cuts. We removed 655,000 low-income Canadians from the federal tax roll entirely with the announcements in Budget 2006, and we also reduced the GST by 1 percentage point. And I'd like to share with the House what Peter Wolford of the Retail Council of Canada had to say about that move. He specifically said that one policy move by the government, the GST cut, did more than twice as much for Canadians' real disposable incomes than they've been able to do for themselves in the last 15 years. Whoa. And more than was done for themselves in a strong economy in 2005. This was a very powerful tool for increasing the income of Canadians. Sounds like we're on the right track, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Further, we heard a lot about. We've heard a lot. Indeed, one of the honourable members in opposition spoke yesterday about how he didn't understand why there was a GST cut, and I suppose he would have to be clear with this House whether or not he would recommend a GST increase, because I think that would be very bad for the economy, very bad for real household incomes, Mr. Speaker, and the ability for people to be able to purchase goods and so forth, and really working families, because we talk about that a lot on this side of the House, helping out working families and low-income Canadians, and really we feel that this was a tremendous tool that helped us do that. So there were a number of items in the pre-budget consultation that we had a problem with, specifically items that spoke about rolling back some of the advances that the Government of Canada made in Budget 2006. And you know, I think we need to ask, you know, would the opposition cancel the fitness tax credit or the transit pass tax credit?
No. No.
Would they roll back the $1,000 Canada Employment Credit? I mean, it really these questions haven't been answered, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker. And what we need to know is of the recommendations. Some of the recommendations in the report call for billions of dollars in additional spending. And really, there's no plan for how we would afford that. And that brings us towards responsible spending, Mr. Speaker. And we know under the last 5 years, total program spending grew by an average of 8.2% annually under the previous government. And in fact, in 2004-2005, that spending the growth in spending was actually 14.4%, which, as we all know, that's about 7 times inflation. It's certainly not something that can be maintained over the long term. So this is why we speak about focusing government, about focusing the spending of government, and being very responsible with taxpayers' dollars. This will help us reduce the overall tax burden for all Canadians. And I'd like to share with the House with Yves Morency, the Vice President of Caisse Desjardins, shared with the Finance Committee on October 25th. He said, "The message we want to send to you is that you should continue in this direction, cutting taxes. That will improve productivity, which will enhance the wealth of businesses, individuals, and the government, because tax revenues will increase." I just want to underline this, Mr. Speaker. He said cutting taxes will increase overall government revenues. I think that's important, because we need to understand the tax reductions and tax revenues for the government are not necessarily linked. Economics teaches us that. So he further went on to say, "We encourage you to continue along this path. You mustn't stop. You must go even further in order to achieve the competitive levels of our main neighbours." Now, of course, he's speaking of the United States. He's speaking of the Asia-Pacific Rim. These are nations that we now actively compete with on a day-to-day basis. Now, in reducing the tax burden, we heard in Advantage Canada a very good linkage that will actually link paying down Canada's debt or our mortgage with reductions in income taxes. And this is what Canadians have said. They've said, you know what, we like the idea of paying off the debt, but what's in it for us? How is that going to benefit me? Well, Canada's new government has specifically came out and itemized for people how it will benefit them. The $700 million that we have saved in interest this year by paying off $13.2 billion of debt will go to Canadians in income tax savings. And we will continue to do that each and every year. By 2010, it will amount to $1.4 billion. Mr. Speaker, almost $6 billion in income tax savings by 2010. Now that's an achievement, and that's something Canadians can celebrate, because now they are actually going to see why paying down debt is going to help them. David Dodge spoke to the Finance Committee, and he spoke of the importance of paying off debt. And he said it's extraordinarily important that in periods when revenues are a little stronger than anticipated, that we use the opportunity to pay down debt. That's how it's supposed to work, he said. He didn't say, come up with a frivolous spending program. He didn't say, grow government spending by 14.4% in a single year. He said, pay the debt down, Mr. Speaker. That's going to help us be competitive. That's going to help us reduce people's taxes. That's what David Dodge said. When we talk about fiscal balance, well, our government recognizes that there was a fiscal imbalance, and we're moving towards fiscal balance, and indeed that's going to be in Budget 2007. And what we recognize is that if we address the fiscal imbalance, we will have a more competitive economic union, and that's important. We talk about creating equal opportunities for Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to speak to a very specific group of Canadians, a group of Canadians that are struggling, and that's farmers, Mr. Speaker. The farmers in Canada have suffered from 10 years of poor agricultural leadership and planning. They're in a difficult position. Well, Canada's new government is working on that, and Budget 2007 specifically sets out additional funding, more commitment by the Government of Canada, long-term assistance for farmers that they need, and we're going to get that funding to the farm gate because that's where it needs to go. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that Canada's new government is on the right track in positioning Canada for a tremendously bright future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentary. Honourable Deputy to Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
And I'd like to thank my colleague from Peterborough for his remarks. One of the problems with this job is that people don't realize this back home, but when you serve on committees, you actually get to know members and respect their contribution, and I enjoy working with him on the Finance Committee. He works very hard and he's done a good job. I think we come at things perhaps from a little bit of a different point of view, and I know that my colleague has been a successful businessman since he was quite young, and it seems to me sometimes that perhaps his view is shaped that everybody has the same opportunity as he does to be successful. I don't think all Canadians do, and I think one of the flaws of the government, in my view, is that it doesn't work hard enough at providing equality of access. I want to ask him about post-secondary education. Over the last number of years, the former Liberal government, invested billions of dollars in research and innovation, some $13 billion since we balanced the books. This budget of 06 put a paltry $200 million over 2 years into research, which has got foundations like CIHR and CFI, as well as the granting agencies, NSERC and SHERC, very concerned. You can't turn the tap off on research and keep the researchers in Canada that have come here over the last number of years. So I'd like to ask him specifically, the recommendation in the finance report did specifically mention CIHR for $350 million. I want to know his views on whether he supports that specific recommendation. And on post-secondary education access, there's thousands of Canadians who simply can't afford to go. And tax breaks don't make any difference to those people. $80 on books is immaterial entirely to those people. We believed last year we put billions of dollars, in fact, into direct support for the lowest income Canadians, for persons with disabilities, for Aboriginal Canadians. And does he believe that the Government of Canada has a direct role to play through things like the Millennium Scholarship in assisting the lowest income Canadians to go to university? And I'd like to wish him a Merry Christmas.
Member for Peterborough.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question and for his hard work on the committee as well. Access is a big question, it is a problem, no doubt, for some low-income Canadians. But what we did in Budget 2006 was we made student loans much more available to people, to students as a whole. But the other thing, Mr. Speaker, my post-secondary institutions, and indeed the one in the members' riding, overall benefited tremendously from the $1 billion that we put into infrastructure for post-secondary institutions in Canada. Now, I know that there is an infrastructure deficit, and we've got to continue along this course. But that's money that, quite frankly, the universities didn't have to charge students for tuition because the government gave them that to help them maintain their schools. So it will help them out tremendously through that $1 billion. And I do support investment into research. I think you're going to see Budget 2007 will specifically target money for research. As a member knows, I have a lot of understanding with respect to the challenges that students faced. I had a fairly significant student debt myself from university. My mother was the financial aid officer at Trent University in Peterborough for more than a decade. I'm well aware of the challenges students face. I also think that students do have a responsibility to some extent for paying for that education. We just need to find the right balance, and we have to make sure that every student that wants to go to university or college or seek post-secondary education has the ability to do so regardless of income.
The Honourable Member for Jean Lebert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for Peterborough for his work on the committee. I would like to ask him a question about the fiscal imbalance, because this was the big promise that the government made to Quebecers during the last election campaign, but the signs that we are seeing are very disappointing. In this whole large report that was prepared in the committee, there is only one recommendation dealing with fiscal imbalance. I will read it for everyone's benefit, that the federal government meet with the provincial and territorial governments to see to what extent they can deal with the fiscal imbalance under the constitutional system. This was not the promise made to Quebecers in the last election campaign. It was not to reevaluate, to react, and so on, but to erase it. What does it take to do that? $3.9 billion. The Minister of Finance in Quebec did not put it quite that way in the National Assembly, but what he said was, we want the equalization system to take into account natural resources for all provinces, and that accounts for $2.8 billion. And then we have a $1.1 billion transfer for education, and I think that adds up to $3.9 billion as a fiscal imbalance. We have the agreement of all the parties. In fact, no one in the committee, none of the party representatives, felt the need to deal more in depth with this. Can the member indicate whether he agrees that this does not meet the election promise?
I thank the honourable member for his question. I know that this is an issue that he's quite passionate about, and it's one that he should be quite heartened to know that our government is taking action on moving towards fiscal balance. In fact, we spoke about it. We didn't just speak about it in the last election campaign. That wasn't just a promise that we made then. We reiterated that promise in Budget 2006. We have again spoke about it in Advantage Canada and the importance of moving towards fiscal balance for our overall competitiveness and benefiting all Canadians. I know that the Finance Minister is meeting next week with provincial representatives. They're going to be talking about equalization. They're going to be talking about fiscal balance. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that this is not an easy and there's no easy solution to these problems because all of the provinces have a different view. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the Finance Minister and to this government to do what's right for all Canadians. They've made a commitment that no province will be worse off after we work through and come up with a new funding formula for equalization. And I think all Canadians and all provinces should be very heartened by that.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member from Peterborough for his comments. Mr. Speaker, about half of Canadians are saying today that they're just a paycheck or two away from living in poverty. And this at a time when large corporations, especially the big banks, the oil and gas industry, are recording record profits. So my question for the honourable member is, if his focus is on tax cuts, how will that address the pressing need of Canadians for services and for jobs that they need in order to pull themselves out of poverty? Because across-the-board tax cuts, no strings attached for corporations, does not create one job, provides no security that there will be greater investment in Canada. And I'd like to know from him, how does he intend to address the growing gap in Canada between the rich and the poor that certainly tax cuts do not address?
The honourable member for Peterborough.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that we recognize that corporations must make a profit in Canada. If they don't overall make a profit in Canada, they will not be in Canada, and we will not have employment in Canada. So we have to have a very balanced approach when we talk about corporate income. But I think the important thing to stress is that by reducing taxes, we don't just increase household income, we increase the incentive to work. A lot of people tell me, and I quite frankly know a lot of people that aren't wealthy. I'm in fact related to a lot of people that aren't that wealthy, and they are a couple paychecks away from bankruptcy at any given time. And what they tell me is the way the system works right now works against them. If they take extra hours, they pay it all out in taxes. It doesn't come back to them. And what this government is saying, if you are going to work hard, then you should be rewarded for working hard. At the same time, we have to look out for those that are less fortunate in our community, and we are addressing that. 655,000 Canadians completely removed from the tax rolls, pension splitting for seniors, increasing the age credit for seniors, doubling the pension allowance for seniors. I mean, these types of measures are specifically increasing the amount of money that all Canadians can keep in their pocket. And ultimately, that's how we're going to help low-income Canadians.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Jean Lebert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to begin by taking this opportunity, probably the last time that I will speak in the House before the Christmas adjournment. Therefore, I want to wish all of my colleagues a good holiday, and of course, all of the people in my riding. I hope that they have an enjoyable time, but that they are careful in their activities and safe. I would like to thank all of the staff of the Finance Committee for the wonderful work that they did that allowed us to develop this report. This report is the object of serious reservations on the part of the Bloc Québécois. The staff worked hard with us both in Ottawa and when we went to Western and Eastern Canada, and I would like to point that out. There are some useful gains that were pushed for by the Bloc Québécois in this report. I'm very pleased to see one recommendation that deals with train noise, because this is a very important issue in my riding. People who live near railways are very much inconvenienced by noise. This is more and more the case, and in Pointe-Charles are people who lived there when the railways came in. They were there for decades. Often they were there and the railways were there and things worked very well, but there were changes and the situation became increasingly difficult for them. So we are trying to find ways to improve things for these people. My colleague on the Transport Committee has worked hard to get amendments to the bill that is under consideration. I would like to thank him for the good work that he has done on behalf of the citizens of Jean-Lebert. In the Finance Committee, I came up with the proposal that the government give tax relief to railways that buy equipment that is less noisy and that creates less of a nuisance for the local people. Therefore, there could be an accelerated amortization for that equipment that would encourage these railways to buy equipment that would be less damaging to the environment on the noise front. And so this is the thrust of the recommendation. There are other recommendations that I support as well, and one of these that I support is to reverse the savage cuts, as we could call them, made by the Conservatives earlier in the present session. These cuts often affect the least fortunate members of our society, people who are in the most difficult situations. We're talking about people who have problems with literacy, reading and writing, women that are in difficult situations, students. All these people are victims of the cuts that have been made, and recommendations in this report aim at coming back to common sense and reversing those cuts. The NDP this time was in agreement with us. We know that we have heard some support for the cuts, but we have a recommendation here. So these are good aspects of this report. However, there are things that are missing from the report, and what is missing is really the next step after the motion that was adopted supporting the recognizing the existence of a Quebecois nation. The three other parties supported that motion, and it is important to go further than that symbolic gesture and implement this reality, that is, that Quebec forms a nation. But in fact, there is no real recognition of the Quebec nation. There was some recognition through those words in the motion. We talk about national programs, national issues, and so on. If there are two nations or a number of nations, we need to use other terms rather than national so that we make it clear there are a number of nations. And if we don't do that, it is just rhetoric. But it is more than rhetoric. This report is full of interference in Quebec's jurisdiction, in the jurisdiction of the provinces. Despite the motion that was adopted here in the House, we still see the same attitude on the part of the federal government. The government wants to come up with more federal standards, more programs, criteria, and controls, even though these things do not come under federal jurisdiction. It is unfortunate that that motion is just rhetoric for the moment. This report does not recognize the Quebecois nation because it does not want to acknowledge that a nation must be able to make the fiscal choices that would allow it to control its destiny. It is clear that the only real way for Quebecers to be able to make those fiscal choices, now that we have been recognized as a nation, is to take the next logical step, which is to become a country. Then we could make all of our fiscal choices. I would just like to give a few examples of what that might mean. That is, making our own fiscal choices as a nation. First of all, Let us look at the Kyoto Protocol. For a long time, the Bloc Québécois has been fighting for the implementation of Kyoto, and anyone who is serious will admit that it is urgent to deal with greenhouse gases. The question is no longer, can we meet our targets? We have to meet those targets. We have a moral obligation to people who live now and the generations to come to prevent this tragedy. If we do not do this, we will have a terrible failure to act. During the 13 years that the Liberals were in office, the greenhouse gas emissions jumped hugely. There was a program, but there was no real will. This is no excuse, however, for the new government to do nothing. That is unacceptable. They say, we will not meet our targets because it is impossible. That means that they are saying they are incompetent. And the only difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives is that the Conservatives know that they are incompetent. In fact, neither party has done anything. So there is the environmental issue. But for Quebec, the Kyoto Protocol has a key economic value as well. In Quebec, if it was a country, for example, or if Canada really wanted to implement the Kyoto Protocol properly and use an environmental approach to go beyond the targets, we could sell credits to other jurisdictions, other countries. Therefore, we could benefit collectively and we could benefit economically. We've been talking about setting up a carbon market for months in Montreal. The government has waffled on this, and we are in the process of losing a financial institution that would be wonderful for the economy of Quebec. People do not want to go further because they would rather give gifts to the tar sands and to the oil industry in Alberta. There are many opportunities in the economic sector that are lost because this action is not being taken. If we actually complied with Kyoto and implemented it, there would be many opportunities. We would have the same benefits for the environment, or from these environmental actions, as Alberta does from the tar sands currently. But the Federalist parties are going against the interests of Quebec in this area. With respect to the $320 million that Quebec is requesting for the implementation of its own plan, the government has never wanted to give Quebec that money to carry out its own plan. We have seen worse than this, in fact, Mr. Speaker. The government has refused Quebec the right during meetings that were held on Kyoto to speak in Nairobi. Just 45 seconds. That isn't very much time. I criticize the Quebec government, the Liberal government in Quebec, because it got down on its knees and begged for just 45 seconds to speak on the world stage. But even 45 seconds is too much for this government. It is too much for these Federalist parties that do not want to recognize that Quebec is a nation and therefore needs to be treated differently.
So, if Quebec were a sovereign nation, this is something that you couldn't talk about for simply 45 seconds. You could have taken a whole week to do this. So finally, that's the advantage of sovereignty. It's the ability to make your own budgetary decisions. The problem, we're not talking about the same nation here. And when we have budget choices that are made that conflict with our own choices, well, that makes things very difficult. Sometimes we are in agreement. That's not a problem, but we're all developing along our own paths. Another example of a budget choice that deals with the daycare services. Quebecers decided to set up its own program. It worked very hard to do so, and Quebecers paid through their taxes for daycare services that were public. We have a program that is cited as a model. There was an agreement that had been established with the previous government. $800 million was given to Quebec to fund its own system, but this was cancelled by the Conservatives. So every time there's a change over in government, they take money, they give it somewhere else. So the result of this agreement is that we have this fiscal imbalance. The member for Peterborough said that it was resolved, but that's not the case at all. And the second thing is that resolving the fiscal imbalance for the medium term, that means not only money for next year, because we don't want to constantly find ourselves waging this war year after year. We have to really resolve the fiscal imbalance. It has to be done. There has to be a fiscal transfer. That goes without saying. And we can see if there's no transfer of dollars, the government of Quebec won't be able to do its long-term planning because the federal government may change the rules of the game as it sees fit. When Quebecers have become a country, there will no longer be an imbalance, and we will have control over our revenue, and we'll be able to spend it as we see fit. There are other examples of programs which have led to lots of wrangling. Parental leave, for instance. The federal government at the time refused to give money to Quebec so that it could set up its own parental leave system, a system that was going to be more generous. And everybody was in agreement with this in Quebec. Everyone was unanimous about the proposal, but it took 10 years of negotiating before Quebec was able to get part of its tax money back so that it could make its own choices, its own budgetary choices, which were social decisions. So, Mr. Speaker, I would submit that when a nation which is almost unanimous about one decision, but it has to wait a decade before it gets its own money back, money paid from its tax base. When you have to wait 10 years before you can get anything done, well, its progress will be stagnated. They're almost going backwards. That's not what Quebecers want. More and more Quebecers are saying that we shouldn't have to ask for permission year after year in order to make social decisions, and sovereignty will enable us to make our own choices. Other examples, well, the aerospace sector is flourishing in Quebec. We've been asking for a policy governing the sector for years, but nothing's been done. But in other sectors, such as the automobile sector, which is flourishing in Ontario, well, there's a real package containing all kinds of measures, and this was viewed as being important for the Canadian nation. But when the Quebec nation asks for something, well, it gets nothing. I talked about what happened earlier for the oil sector. there are all kinds of fiscal gifts given. There are investments in the tar sands are given all kinds of measures, and so you can see it simply just doesn't make sense. There was the example of the Science Center in Quebec City. The Bloc Québécois has really tried to push this file. We suggested this to the Finance Committee, but it was dismissed very summarily. So you can see that the Conservative members from Quebec are unable to get things going for Quebec. But it was the same thing with the Liberals. It was simply due to the fact that they're not the elected officials of the Quebec nation. It's just a mathematical equation here. When Quebec is sovereign, it will be able to fund as it sees fit not only this Science Center initiative in Quebec City, but the whole research and development sector. You know that most R&D centers are concentrated in Ontario, in Ottawa, and there are just crumbs left over for Quebec, and that's unfortunate because investments in research and development are very structural, and when we're a sovereign country, we'll be able to attract money to Quebec City, our national capital. We'll be able to set up our own R&D centers in order to assist our economy. Finally, I'd like to conclude, Mr. Speaker, by talking about this issue of the fiscal imbalance. I raised this earlier in the House. There are $3.9 billion that should be paid in the short term to Quebec, and we have to come up with a solution, perhaps a medium-term fiscal transfer that will resolve this issue. But as far as we're concerned, this is a first step towards sovereignty. We have to show Quebecers what we can do when we take control of our tax dollars, when we can make our own budgetary decisions. Just imagine what will happen the day when we have our control over this money as a nation. We'll have control over all our revenues. We'll have the total control over all our budgetary choices, and this nation, Mr. Speaker, will be able to develop to its full potential. It will be more prosperous, and it will cooperate with the Canadian nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments?
The honourable member for Northumberland, Quinte West.
Mr. Speaker, I listened intently while the honourable member was discussing budgetary issues and issues surrounding what he perceives to be an imbalance in the way Canada treats the provinces, and in particular the province of Quebec. But I'd just like to bring to the member's attention that this last budget reduced taxes for all Canadians. One of the greatest tax-reducing budgets that ever occurred in this country, at least over the past 5 or 6 budgets that were introduced by the previous government. And further, he mentioned that there were still no breaks, and I bring to the honourable member's attention just in the last few days, probably in the last few hours. I believe it was the Minister of Industry announced $350+ million going to Pratt & Whitney, which is primarily concentrated in the member's province, with regard to modernization, replacing gas turbine engines, because we know we need to become more efficient. We need to be on the leading edge of that industry. So when he's speaking to his constituency, I think he owes it to them to give them the facts, not to distort the facts. And in addition, not that very long ago, at the beginning of this month, we also introduced tariffs for Canadian apparel manufacturers. Canada's new government understands the importance of the clothing industry and the apparel industry, and we know where much of that is concentrated in the honourable member's province. So we're sensitive to that, and that's why we introduced an additional $4.5 million in tariff relief to help the Canadian apparel manufacturers be more competitive internationally.
And we consulted with the industry, and that's the difference between the current government and the previous government. So I just wonder if the honourable member was cognizant of those recent developments in our relationship with his province and constituency.
The honourable member for Jean Lebert. Mr. Speaker, basically, the purpose of my presentation was to demonstrate that the Quebec nation must be able to make its own budgetary decisions, and it cannot do so under the current federal system. This is not a competition to see who gets what in order to please one region over another. My colleague spoke about the equity between provinces, but that's not the question. It's understandable that within a nation that we support each other mutually. But what's not normal is that the Quebec nation, which it relies on its National Assembly in Quebec City to look after, to assume its responsibilities, cannot do so because of the fiscal imbalance. For years now, we have been looking at just the opposite that's occurring, regardless of whether the Liberals or Conservatives are in power. There seems to be a centralization that's occurring. So we've got to the point where we're saying, well, what do we do as a nation in order to go farther? We have to recognize it's been recognized that Quebec forms a nation, but Quebec has to be given the means that will enable it to make its own decisions. And it must be noted that this is something that Canada wants to do. I'm not criticizing Canadians for making their own decisions, their own budgetary decisions. The example that was given is a very attractive one. Money is given to parents for a daycare, an allowance, but it's almost as if this is a good illustration of what we don't want. We don't want to be told by the federal government, be it Liberal or Conservative, that look at how good we are, look what we've given you, aren't we great? We want to make our own decisions, and we want our choices to be respected. It's as simple as that, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, if I may, I'd like to wish everyone in my riding a happy holidays. I know that the member for Berskany-Masconnaughey will be doing so as well. As a critic for the Bloc Québécois and transport, I would like to wish all citizens that they should drink moderately and use the red nose program if they felt that they need to. I appreciate what the member for Jean Lebert said. I received a lot of requests from him because I had an opportunity to make amendments on behalf of the Bloc Québécois for the C11. This was a bill on noise pollution. I would like, now we're trying to come up with a way to make as less noise as possible. The Conservatives didn't want to go any further than that. They didn't want to deal with the issue of vibrations. The Transportation Agency felt that this was an important problem, however. And what about the people who live very close to the rail yards? That's a problem. They're inconvenient. The Transport Agency will now be able to look into this issue. My question now pertains to railway. I know that there's compensation that's being provided for under this bill, so I'd ask my colleague to explain what advantages are contained in this bill for the rail companies. The honourable member for Jean Lebert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for Argenteuil for all the work that he did at the Transportation Committee. This is a concrete example of what the Bloc Québécois can do for the citizens in Quebec who, that is, we were able to give the bill more teeth so that there would be some action that could be taken against rail companies. We did this through amendments. So indeed, there's a regulatory aspect to this issue, but we weren't satisfied with that in the bloc. We said that the rail companies should do their bit to change their equipment, but obviously that required investment, significant investment, and we wanted to acknowledge this reality. Therefore, we proposed, and this was accepted by the committee, it was contained in the recommendations, that there be an amortization of rail equipment that serves to reduce noise. So what do we mean by an accelerated amortization? That means that rail companies would be able to, we're hoping the minister will buy into this, will be able to deduct from their taxes any expenditures that they incur in this area to encourage the rail companies to make changes more quickly and to shorten the time required to make these modifications. So I think that that's an example where we looked at the regulations and we gave more teeth to the Transportation Act, and on the other hand, on the fiscal side, by supporting the companies that want to improve their infrastructure, their performance, if you like. We have enough time for one more brief question and a brief answer. The honourable member for Peterborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his speech. I just wanted to ask him about a very specific recommendation. I didn't hear him refer to it in his speech, but I think it's something that he's also very passionate about, which is recommendation number 35, which speaks to the elimination of tax havens in an effort to ensure that all corporations, businesses, and individuals pay their fair share of taxes. Perhaps he might comment on that, why it was important that we put that in, and why it's important that the Finance Minister acts on that recommendation.
The honourable member for Jean Lebert. I think that the best part of my colleague's intervention was the last sentence where he said why it was so important that yes, it's vital that the minister take action, and in all honesty, the Conservatives have been in power for a year now. Liberals did nothing for 13 years. The member for La Salle-Mel, the former Minister of Finance, modified tax haven bills to give advantages to shipping companies. That has to be stopped. Taxpayers, for the most part, are honest. They do their bit, and everybody has to contribute and do its bit.
The honourable member for Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to be up today to talk about the work of the Finance Committee over the last number of months. But before I begin, I'd like to wish everybody here in the House and those who are watching at home and those in my riding a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year as we're getting close to that. Thank you very much. Rather applause on that. Most of my speech today will reflect on the process of what we were able to accomplish, how it worked. As somebody who's new to Parliament, who was elected on the 23rd of January, the process to deal with budgets was something that was new to me and how it works here, but I like to relate it a little bit to how it worked for the budgets I worked on for 13 years at the municipal level. I want to talk to a little bit about my own process in terms of budget input and how we were able to determine what was important to Burlington, and talk a little bit about the recommendations that we have and how the report works and where that goes from here. First of all, I want to thank the involvement of all committee members, whether they're Conservative, Liberal, Bloc, or New Democrat. I think we worked well together. Obviously, we have different views on particular issues, but overall, I think as a committee, we worked very well together and worked very closely as we traveled across the country, both going to the west and to the east, to see what Canadians felt should be in the budget for 2007. And I want to remind everybody that this is advice that the committee is giving, to the finance minister, and the finance minister will look at the advice in detail, run the numbers on certain issues, and come back with answers, and build what he thinks is appropriate, in this case it's a he, into the next budget, which we expect in the spring of 2007. The going across country, I think, was important to the process. We were in, I had the opportunity to go all across the country. We were in Vancouver, Yellowknife, Fort McMurray. We were in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon. We were in St. John's, Newfoundland. We were in Halifax. We were hosted by one of our members of the committee who is from the Halifax area and did a fine job of hosting us there in Halifax. We were in Quebec City, and we were in Toronto. And, of course, there were people here who came to see us at the committee here in Ottawa. The way it worked, so people understand that, I think it's important that people understand, is that we had panels. In the morning, in the afternoon, we had 6 to 8 to 10 people come and talk to us, each given about 5 minutes each to make their presentation. Then it went around, as all committees do, and we asked questions on the specific topics that they had. In this case, the topics were not all related. So you could have somebody on a different topic sitting beside each other, each giving their 5 minutes, giving us a broad perspective of what the needs are across the country. And I think it's fair to say, and at least in my opinion, I'm not sure what the committee's opinion would be, but in my opinion, that there is a variety of needs across this country and desires. And it is a process that's important to be done. And I'm not sure it was done in the past, but I think it's the right thing to be doing to understand what the particular issues are for their area. The one thing I would comment on is that we didn't randomly pick people to come out. Most people represented their organization, their particular interest. So they were very focused on what they wanted, and they understood, and they only had 5 minutes. If there was one thing I'd like to comment on in terms of the meeting system that we have, I actually don't mind having a variety of opinion on different topics. It makes it for a much more interesting meeting and allows for a lot better questioning, in my opinion. But we did see a lot of repeat people. We saw people from different organizations from different parts of the country basically giving us the same message. And unfortunately, they only had 5 minutes. So I think the committee, when they do it again next year, if they do it again next year, should consider that if people are applying for these positions from across the country, that if their organization is nationwide and they're seeing us in other spots, that they make a decision where it's the most effective for them, and that we allow more time for their presentations. Because 5 minutes is not a lot of time. They highlight a few things that is interest to them, and I think for a better process, for me personally, and I'm only speaking for me personally, not for the committee at this particular moment, that if they had more time to elaborate on what their interests are in their particular topic, I think it would make for a better consultation process. And so that's one of my recommendations. I want to thank the research staff and the clerks who helped organize those events. It's difficult. We basically take a committee that would happen here in the House and we move it from one city to the next, and it happens overnight. And they did an absolute fabulous job of making sure that we were all prepared, that we knew who was coming to see us, that we had the research material and their presentations in front of us. And that is a lot of work and not an easy task. I know people maybe think, oh, their committee's on a bit of a junket, they're going across the country. But it is actually work from 8 in the morning till 5 at night. You jump on a plane, you fly to the next place, you go to a hotel room, and you're back at it again 9 o'clock, and the room looks almost the same as it did the day before, and you have all the information in front of you. So they did a great job. Our analysts, in this case, were taking in all the information that was provided by those who presented to us, and understanding the questions that were coming from the different sides of the table. And then they were looked at that and recorded that, and they provided a really good report for us to review once we were all done our consultation process. That report was very thick. It had lots of information in it, and we didn't necessarily agree with everything. And, of course, as a group, we did not agree with everything. But for the majority of the things, or at least some of the things, we agree on. And another thing that if I was to make a suggestion is that I would be interested in seeing that in the future, I'm not sure if this will work, that we narrow the topics to the areas that we actually agree on, and that we'd like to submit to the finance minister for their consideration. And again, it's for their consideration. It's not for their implementation. And then what we did this time, which I appreciate, we offer each party an opportunity to put in a supplementary report. And in fact, the New Democrats and the Conservatives put in what we called a supplementary opinion. And our other friends put in a minority opinion. And based on the history of this place and how things work, they're called minority reports. But for the budget consultation, I think it's more effective, more realistic, if we say, here are the 4 or 5, 10, whatever that number is, things that we all agree on that we want to recommend, and I think there are those things. And here are supplementary ideas that we heard, or as a group that we have to submit. It shouldn't be as partisan, I don't think, as it needs to be, or as it has been. And I think this is one way of showing Canadians that we are willing to work together as a minority, whether it's a minority or a majority government. I think this is the way to do it. And I think Canadians do send us here to get things done. And this is one of my my personal opinion on how things could be improved. Now, me personally, the budget's always been important to me. As a city councillor, I was known for my my tenacity, both at my region, the region of Halton and the city of Burlington, for going over the budget with a fine-tooth comb and making suggestions and making changes. And not all of them passed because they couldn't get acceptance by everybody. And I expect the exact same thing here. We're doing it more as a group, though, instead of individually. But for me, I needed some input from my public. And so I had a few weeks ago, probably a month and a half ago, I had a public meeting in my riding, strictly on the budget and what they'd like to see in the budget. We had about 80 people out to it, which I thought was pretty good for a Thursday evening. And the meeting lasted almost 3 hours. And we taped it, so we had we knew what was said, and we were going with it. Another thing that I think is important for the public to know is how this process works, that it isn't picked out of a tree, this low-lying fruit's picked and that's what goes in the budget, that there is a process and that we do work at it. And I have put together a show, which is on my local cable company, that talks about how the budget process is done, and it is airing right now. So there's still an opportunity for constituents of mine to let me know what they'd like to see in the budget. The budget obviously has not been set, and there's still a number of months for that to happen. So I think it's important for all of us to consult with our constituents on these things, and you pick your own way to be able to do it. At the end of the day, excuse me, we've come up with 43 recommendations that we didn't all agree on. Let's be frank. It is a minority parliament, and so there was votes on each and every recommendation, and some got in and some didn't. And near the end of my presentation, I will talk about a few that I supported as an individual member of parliament. And I believe my side, the Conservative caucus, also supported at committee, and I'd like to talk about that. But there's 43 of them, and the report's broken down into a number of areas to make it easier for Canadians to understand what we're talking about. And the theme of this year, and I think it's important to have this theme, is how can we be more competitive in this world market? And anyone who says we're not working in a competitive world, I think is relatively naive and is really playing politics with the issue, because no matter which company in my riding that I talk to, most of them, the vast majority, are competing against other competitors from around the world, not just from around the block. And so we need to have a budget. We need to have a government that thinks about the economy in this perspective, in a world perspective, that we're competing as companies with worldwide companies. We're competing as individuals. We're competing for talent. I know that's been discussed about where we're going with talent and people. The mobility of labor has increased exponentially over the last number of years, and we're working on that. So we talk about health care and health of our people. It's all part of our budget. Another section of our budget is life learning, which I think is important, that we have recommendations to talk about that learning isn't just done in elementary school, which, as you know, is not part of the constitutionally is not part of what the federal government is responsible for. And we're really looking at research, and we're looking at how to assist students at post-secondary education levels. And there are a number of recommendations in that area. It's important for Canadians, as we saw this week, the actual, was reported in the newspaper, the actual net worth of people has gone up, but also has their net debt, in a sense. That debt for individual debt has gone up, and we need to work on issues that help people, give them incentives to save money, to invest, and to save for the future. And we have done that through a number of recommendations in this budget. I think it's also important that we have full employment, or as close to full employment as possible here in this country. We are doing very well. The economy is doing well. There is, in my particular area, the employment rate is not terribly high. It's important, though. There are unemployed people, and we need to give them incentives to get to find work and help them find that work. And this budget recommendation also provides those types of incentives. We got to look at communities. Communities are important to each and every one of us, of course. We don't all live in a bubble. I'm beside Toronto and Oakville and Hamilton, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to make those communities competitive, so that they can compete not against each other necessarily, but other communities around the world, and making sure that it's a healthy place for them to live. Infrastructure for me was very important. There's a number of recommendations on infrastructure. My infrastructure I found going across the country, my infrastructure needs for my riding is completely different in some areas than others. But I think infrastructure should be focused. We heard from one organization which talked about FCM, I think I can mention their name, which I used to be active part of as a member of a municipal council. FCM had moved a little bit to saying they wanted long-term funding, so for long-term planning. Now, we've supported their infrastructure funding through the gas tax, and will continue to do so. It runs out in terms of its present commitment in the early 2010, 2012. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but the next number of years. And they're looking for a longer piece for that, and we discussed that. But the one interesting thing is that they wanted to add what we used to call soft services. They wanted arenas and so on and those types of things, which was news to me, which was something that I needed to discuss and debate with those people, and that's why it was important to be on this trip to understand those differences. We do have money, excuse me for a second, set aside for environmental initiatives, and I think those are also important, and they are included in those 45 recommendations. We also have a section on in this report on charitable giving and the voluntary sector. I've done more than my share, I think, of volunteering over the number of years. I could give you a long list of associations that I've been on boards on and helped with, and I've done door knocking for raising money for a number of organizations within my riding, as we all have in here. And we looked at a number of recommendations, and I have a recommendation that I might highlight here in a few minutes that talks about that section. But we do have a section in there on that. And we also have a section on arts and culture, myself been active in this area in my local riding. I've been very much a leader in terms of promoting a performing arts center for the city of Burlington, a piece of infrastructure that the city does not have, and I hope that we are able to deliver it in the near future. I'm part of a fundraising cabinet now. There's other people leaders have come to the forefront and are leading on that project on the local front, and I'm doing what I can from here to make that happen. Corporate taxation was mentioned earlier in an earlier question, and at the end of the day, corporate taxation, there is a section on how we can improve corporate taxation, and I think it needs to be improved. We got to remember what the theme of this budget, budget consultation was how to be competitive, and business is part of being that competitive. How our businesses compete against others, and and we heard a lot from a lot of in a lot of presentations that we need to be more competitive from a corporate area. We heard a lot from innovation, research, and entrepreneurship. I have a number of post-secondary education institutions in my area, none particularly in Burlington yet, but we have a sign-up that McMaster is hopefully moving to Burlington, and we have a location for that for at least one of their schools. And it is an important piece, and I think we had a really good discussion about where that is going and where that needs to go for us to be competitive in the international market. We have a number of other spending issues. We did talk about the surplus and the fiscal imbalance, both included in this presentation that we are giving to the finance minister. And I think it's important that people understand that we're not ignoring these issues, and that the finance minister knows where we need to stand. I'm certainly supportive of any surplus that exists, that we need to have a plan for that surplus and continue that plan for that surplus, and that's what this recommendation does. Surplus really is overtaxation, and I have never been a fan of overtaxation. I don't think most Canadians are a fan of overtaxation. I do understand that we do need, from my previous experience, a bit of a cushion just in case things get out of whack from an economic point of view on occasion. But that doesn't mean we have to overtax to make that happen. And fiscal imbalance, or fiscal balance, as we like to say, is part of our presentation, is part of this presentation, is part of our discussion. And in this House that we are working on those issues. There are some local issues in there that people had, and I appreciate all the different parties putting together what they were interested in. I don't necessarily agree with everything they had, but I do appreciate their efforts. There's a couple of recommendations that I would like to highlight so that you would know what we were talking about. I know lots of people talking generalities in here, and there are 43 recommendations. Mr. Speaker, I'm even going to speak to ones that I think the majority of us agreed with in this book, and I'm going to pick one or two. One that I want to talk about is the arts. One that is one of my favorites. As a group, I believe, I'm not sure if we all agreed on it, but I know I did. It's recommendation 22 that the arts and culture are important to this government and to the Finance Committee. And we have in here, and just so that those who know that we are recommending a funding increase that to the Canada Council of Arts. But I think it's important to note, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important to note that this government in its 2006 budget have increased money to the arts. We've increased $30 million this year, and we're increasing another $50 million next year. The Arts Council came to see us a couple of times. It's one of the examples where I think they could have had more time at one event instead of a number of events. That they want to get to $300 million over a number of years. Now, there was a debate on how many years that would be, and I probably lost that debate at committee, and it says 2 years, over 2 years in here. I'm not sure we can make it that far, or that quickly, but I think it's important that those kinds of things are highlighted. Another thing that in my work with charities is that there is a recommendation in here that publicly listed securities for private foundations be considered for the same tax holiday that we provided in 2006, so that people can donate those securities to a charity and make that happen. So I want people to, I know my time is up, I want people to read the recommendations, understand what we provided here. We will see some of it, I'm sure, in the next budget. I look forward to having that debate. And my final comment is that if a lot of the things that we had discussions on actually...
I regret that the honourable member couldn't get his final comment in, but I do have to keep the debate moving. The honourable member for Yukon.
Well, two things. One is the member talked about research, and as was mentioned in question period today, the government's made substantial cuts to research, so I wonder what his thoughts are on that. And second is, as he knows, one of the recommendations was to restore the cuts to a whole bunch of areas, to literacy, and this was, I was at one committee hearing, and this came up loud and clear. It took up most of the hearing of the public. It wasn't a partisan thing. It was the general public. They referenced all these cuts to vulnerable people, and of course it did then show up as a recommendation in a report that the cuts to literacy, to the Court Challenges program, to volunteerism, to museums, to tourism, all be reinstated. And I wonder if he has a comment, if he'll be supporting that recommendation.
The honourable member for Burlington.
I think I'll deal with the. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate.
Order. before the honourable member for Burlington in response to that question, I see the honourable government House Leader is rising on a point of order.
I am seeking it. I think you might find unanimous consent for the following motion, that notwithstanding... Yes. I'll read slowly. I want to accommodate all members of the House. That notwithstanding any standing order or usual practices of the House, on Wednesday, December 13, 2006, the House shall stand adjourned at the end of the time provided for government orders, and for the remainder of the day, the Chair shall not receive any quorum calls, dilatory motions, or requests for unanimous consent. When the House adjourns on Wednesday, December 13, 2006, it shall stand adjourned until Monday, January 29, 2007, provided that for the purposes of Standing Order 28, it shall be deemed to have sat on Thursday, December 14th, and Friday, December 15, 2006.
Does the honourable government House Leader have the unanimous consent of the House to move this motion? Yes. La Chambre a entendu la...
The House has heard the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
The honourable member for Burlington responding to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question, and I also appreciate the member opposite joining us on committee when we were in his hometown. First, on I kind of got sidetracked with the thing, but on research, I think research is important. I think there's a number of recommendations in here in research. We've heard a number of recommendations across the country. I have McMaster University have come and see me a number of times about the research. I've had a number of other schools in the area, U of T, a number of them come and see me at making presentations on research. And I think research is covered in this presentation, and that I think the Finance Minister will take that under consideration when he sets his next budget. On cuts, on the removal of cuts, Mr. Speaker, I will not be supporting us going back to some of those cuts. I think those were made. If you actually read the documentation of why those cuts were made, whether they were administrative cuts, whether there were cuts to programs that had money in them but that were never applied for, there were a number of good reasons that we have made those cuts. In addition, we got elected saying that we were going to look after the taxpayers' dollar. And myself used to bring numerous cuts to the city and regional budgets every year. Did not get them all, but I got some. And so I will continue to...
Well, the honourable member will be able to answer another question in due course, but before I go back to questions and comments, I wish to advise honourable members that in light of the motion just adopted, there will be a reception for honourable members in room 216 following the adjournment of the House at 5:30. Tous les députés sont invités.
All members are invited to celebrate the end of this session. Questions and comments, the honourable member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Well, to begin with, Mr. Speaker, I would like to wish a very good holiday to all of the citizens of Berthier-Maskinongé. I listened to the speech by the Conservative colleague, and I have a question for him. Within the margin that the government has in its fiscal sphere right now, we know that there have been many cuts to social programs lately for women, for people who are in linguistic minority communities and so on. I'm talking here about the Court Challenges program that was cut. The Bloc Québécois has been calling for the reinstatement of a program for older workers, for example. We need measures to help these workers, like PAWA or something else, but this government has cut drastically in social programs. I would like to find out, when the government has so much fiscal room to maneuver, why is the government attacking the least fortunate in our society?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. It was an excellent question. And based on his reasoning, or the reasoning of the honourable member, we would never cut anything. The government would never look at a program and decide that had done its job or it wasn't doing its job. Because we've allocated money to it, that's it. It's going to exist forever. Well, this government doesn't operate that way. We look at all programs to make sure that they're value for money and that they're delivering the services that they're supposed to deliver. If they are not delivering the service they're supposed to deliver, then it's time that they be ended. And I make no apologies for that. And I think the government, no matter which government you're in, should be looking at ways to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are spent efficiently and effectively and that are not wasted on programs that are not producing the results that they're intended to produce. They may have good intentions when they're first developed, Mr. Speaker, but if they're not coming through at the end, it's up to the politicians of the day to make the decision that it's time to move on and develop new programs that will deliver the answers that they're looking for. Thank you.
Further questions and comments? The honourable member for Mississauga South.
Thank you. Thank you.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park. Got to spread it around, you know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for his statement, and I should say it was a pleasure working with him on the Government Operations and Estimates Committee. We were sorry to lose him to this other committee, but my question to him is concerning our rail service. The people of Canada own a passenger rail service which has worked hard to boost its ridership. It's an environmentally friendly form of transportation. It's the preferred form of transportation, the only form of transportation for many Canadians, and yet we have neglected our Via Rail passenger service. We've neglected to invest the funds to renew the infrastructure and to maintain this form of transportation at a time when many other countries are heavily investing in passenger rail service as one of the preferred forms of transportation. I'd like to ask the honourable member whether his committee considered further investment in Via Rail and what is he going to be recommending on this.
Member for Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question and the kind words about working with her on the Government Operations Committee. I don't miss it. I will be frank with you. I don't believe we got into absolute detail in terms of Via Rail. I may have to check my notes on that. But Via Rail, I'll tell you, I was on as a passenger just a couple of weekends ago. Used it to go to Montreal and back. And I do think in terms of a transportation mode of transportation, that railway does play an important role in this country, and I think it deserves, as part of the greater infrastructure money and review of what we need to do for infrastructure and for the environment, that rail will play a role in the future budgets. I think it will play a role in future policy, both environmental and infrastructure for this government. I also want to, she mentions VIA, but I also want to mention GO. In my own particular riding of Burlington, GO Rail, GO Train, and Via Rail play a very, very important role, and they're actually adding a track as we speak to add more rail service to my riding and to my community. And I'm very supportive, actually working with them. I had a meeting with Via Rail not that long ago to talk about issues with noise and some other things that have been dealt with in a different bill than this one. But to summarize, I think rail and all transportation needs to be looked at, and what's best for the environment, what's best for the communities, and what's best for the infrastructure for people and for business to be viable in this country.
We got a couple of questions we want to get in, so a short one, Mississauga South, and then Falkirk Inner.
Mr. Speaker, in his speech, the member said that the existence of a surplus represents overtaxation. I wonder if the member could explain to the House, how do you pay down the national debt without having a surplus?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. I didn't say that there shouldn't be a surplus. I think if you were listening carefully, I always said that there should be a cushion, and part of that cushion is a view, and this government has, through its Advantage Canada, identified that there is a net debt program that we would like to pursue. There is a plan, first time I think that this country has ever had one, a plan to pay down our net debt, and to do that, it will require tax dollars, of course, to make that happen. It is part of our cost basis. It's a part of our cost basis. In my experience as a municipal politician, we always had a bit of a surplus that we built in.
The honourable member for Selkirk-Innerleigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to ask my honourable colleague for his great presentation. And flipping through the report and looking at the recommendations, it's a pretty good report, pretty comprehensive. And I know a lot of work went into it by this member and all the members of the Finance Committee. So I do want to ask him, one recommendation over there that's important to my riding is mental health, because I have a mental hospital in my riding, and wanted to see more investment into our mental health system. I want to get some comments from him on that. And also infrastructure needs in rural communities that seem to be at a bit of a disadvantage compared to larger urban centres. So I just want to hear back from him on that and how important that is to the overall economic growth and prosperity of all Canadians. And this probably being the last time I'm going to be able to get up, Mr. Speaker, I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. The honourable member for Burlington, very briefly.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It says it's been 45 minutes. First of all, on the mental health piece, I absolutely agree with my fellow member. We had some great presentations on mental health. There is a recommendation there to put a plan together for mental health, which does not exist now and has not existed in the past. We're asking the finance minister to fund that and to make that happen. We did have a Senate report that talked about mental health, how it should be funded, and a number of things. The other house, my apologies. Being new. So we are working on that. And on infrastructure, I think there's infrastructure needs, both rural and urban, and they need to be looked at in balance. But this presentation does talk about infrastructure, and hopefully it will look at solving some of those problems both rural and urban have. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour, resuming debate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say, first of all, I'm going to be splitting my time with the most distinguished member from Laval-Les-Îles. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak to the pre-budget recommendation and, in fact, what we hope to see in the next budget, Budget 2007. I did have the opportunity to be a member of the Finance Committee. Along with colleagues from all the parties, we produced this report, which I think is very, very comprehensive and has a lot of good recommendations in it. And I would like to echo what some of the other members of the committee have said, that we did work quite well together as we traveled Canada. We went from Whitehorse to St. John's, and I was particularly pleased that when we were in my home community of Halifax, that in fact we had a little reception on board the HMCS Sackville, which is Canada's naval memorial and a fitting tribute to the many Canadians who've served this country so well. And I know that all the members enjoyed that. So I'd like to very quickly just sort of preface my comments on some of the specific recommendations by saying that I think that the actions that we've seen of the government so far, particularly the billions of dollars worth of cuts to women's groups, student employment, seniors, minorities, the voluntary sector, are wrong, Mr. Speaker. I think they're wrong to most Canadians. Certainly that's what we heard as we traveled the country, that people are very concerned about what the government has done so far. And I hope 2007, the budget in particular, provides this government a chance to show that vulnerable Canadians actually count in their plans. So I'd like to just take you through some of the recommendations that I think are particularly important. As we've heard, there was, in fact, 43 recommendations. The first one was on the whole issue of health promotion and wellness, and which is something that's very important. It's one of the issues that brought me to politics. Coming from Atlantic Canada, we have a very high incidence of chronic disease. Diabetes is out of control, cardiovascular disease, arthritis, and cancers. So there's an issue here. I won't read it all, but it actually gets to having an impact on health promotion. And it also indicates that the government should continue to allocate funds for the National Immunization Strategy, which was an initiative that came out of our Public Health Agency, and the member from St. Paul's, when she was the Minister of Public Health, this was one of her babies, and she really did a great job on it, but it needs to be renewed. It is imperative that the government renew that strategy so that all children in Canada get the immunization that they need. And further to that, we have recommended that a dedicated fund be established of $300 million over 3 years for future immunization programs. There are some very exciting new vaccines being developed. Merck Frost has one for the human papillomavirus that can virtually eliminate cervical cancer. It's very important that we invest in these vaccines, in this case for Canadian girls and Canadian women, that will virtually eliminate cervical cancer. The second recommendation, one of my colleagues mentioned Mental health, we've got a recommendation here of the creation of the Canadian Mental Health Commission. I don't need to go into that a lot. Senator Kirby and his group from the Senate have put forward a very comprehensive proposal, which I hope the government follows up, not only with vague commitment, but with specific dollars attached. Recommendation 6 is to amend the Income Tax Act to increase the value of the Canada Child Tax Benefit. There is not a specific dollar associated with this, but a lot of anti-poverty groups, John Murphy from the National Council on Welfare and others, suggested $4,900. The Canada Child Tax Benefit was an initiative of the previous Liberal government that a lot of people credit. There is way too much child poverty in Canada, but the child tax benefit is the kind of policy, I think, that an enlightened government takes the responsibility and says we're going to do something for our kids to make sure that all kids have some access to the resources that they need as they grow up. One of my most important recommendations, one of our most important recommendations, was around student financing. Mr. Speaker, about a year ago, just over a year ago, the previous government introduced a very important update that included huge, sweeping investments in access for students, for low-income families, for persons with disabilities, and it recognized that the federal government does have a role to play. And specifically, we are recommending in this report that the Canada Millennium Scholarship Foundation be renewed, the mandate be renewed. This, again, was an initiative of some years ago. It needs new money. It needs an indication very soon that it will continue, and I think it's imperative that we do that, and also expand Canada Access grants. These are grants that provide direct support for students who don't have the means to go to university. We're recommending that that be upgraded to all 4 years of an undergraduate education. Very important. The topic of our whole budget discussions was competitiveness, productivity. You cannot discuss competitiveness without putting the people in the picture. And the people are the kids in Canada, the young people in Canada that absolutely need assistance in getting to university. And access is a huge priority for them, and it should be for the Government of Canada. Recommendation 9 was to reduce personal income taxes. I think that one speaks to itself. Rather than investing $5.5 or $6 billion in GST cuts, which disproportionately favor those who don't need the assistance, reduce personal income tax for the lowest income Canadians, raise the personal exemption, make a difference in Canadian lives. Recommendation 12 was to reinstate the programs and funds that were eliminated. So these are the cuts: the status of women, the law commission, the court challenges, volunteerism, and things like that. And there was another recommendation, number 13, for Skippy, the Supporting Communities Partnership Initiative. These are very, very important to Canadians. And I got to tell you, nobody came to our committee and said that was a good move, but lots of people came and said that's dumb and it's got to be fixed. So reinstate those cuts is a very important recommendation of our committee. Mr. Speaker, recommendation 21, federal government study the feasibility of a tax measure that would recognize and reward the hours of volunteer activity. Now, this is a complex one. I understand that. But there are some templates that we can look at, where, for example, Ron Coleman and GPI, which is a Genuine Progress Index based in Atlantic, Canada, actually does look at the quality of life, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of volunteerism activity and quality of life and environment. And I think that truly enlightened society goes beyond just the economics and says, you know, there's a holistic approach to life, and we need to do that. And I think recognizing the huge value that volunteers provide is a good start in that direction. And, of course, cutting the volunteerism initiative is sending the wrong signal. Recommendation 22, to increase funds allocated to the arts and culture. Mr. Speaker, there is so much that we get from arts and culture. Every one of us in this House can look to the artists in their community. In my case, we've got new artists like Matt Mays, and we've got artists in Nova Scotia, in Dartmouth Cole Harbour, people like Tom Forrestal. We've got dancers. And, you know, you can't just look at a budget and say, okay, all we're going to do is health and economic development. Arts and culture provide so much of what makes us unique as Canadians, makes us unique as Nova Scotians, makes us unique as Dartmouth Cole Harbour residents as well. Recommendation 25, to amend the Excise Tax Act in order to ensure a full rebate on the GST paid by universities, colleges, school boards, and hospitals. We heard about that quite a bit, Mr. Speaker. It makes eminent sense that we don't want to be penalizing behaviour that leads to increased productivity for Canada. A very important one was on research. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I've mentioned before that in the late 1990s, Canada underwent a transformation in research and innovation. And we weren't the only ones in the world doing it, but we did it as well as anybody and became kind of a template for success internationally and have put something in the order of $13 billion into research and innovation. We created CIHR, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, out of the old MRC, Medical Research Council, and have put huge amounts of money into CIHR, but that money leverages so much more and has not only done basic biomedical and clinical research, but has looked at population health, has looked at health systems. How do we impact the health of Aboriginal Canadians? How do we impact the health of Atlantic Canadians, of women, of groups within society? And they have leveraged so much money. It's very important that we continue that. So CIHR has made a very strong case for increased funding of $350 million, and that's in the report. To increase the indirect cost of research is also in the report for quite a while. The research institutes in Canada have said we need 40% indirect costing. They get now in the range of 25 cents on the dollar. Again, last year's economic update did propose to go to 40%, but that was cancelled by the new government when they came in. So we need to do that. And I think, Mr. Speaker, one thing that was missed in our report is the very important issue of research that's done by health charities, by the heart and stroke, by cancer, by diabetes. They also need indirect costs, and the government has to find a way to make sure that they're not penalized. So, Mr. Speaker, GrowthWorks Atlantic came to see us a number of times and indicated the federal government should amend the income tax to increase to $1,500 the Labour-sponsored funds tax credit. That's very important for venture capital. Mr. Speaker, international development, critical. We have to, at some point in time, do more than we're doing. Canada has been very supportive internationally of development work in countries like, or in continents like Africa and Asia and Central America. But we should commit to the 0.7%, the Pearson standard in international development. While we're preparing here to go home for a comfortable Christmas as members of Parliament and go back to our ridings, and most Canadians are going to have a reasonable Christmas. Half the world suffers in extreme poverty with much disease. And I've got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, as a nation, we have to get our heads around the fact that we have a responsibility to the rest of the world. I think it's very, very important that we hit that 0.7%, and I think that this government should take some steps in that direction. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the most important advice that I ever got about politics was from my mother.
I'm sorry, I'm very conscious of the fact that the member's colleague wants to get up if there are no questions and comments. But questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I listened to the member intently, and I just wanted to. I was surprised that the member didn't mention our advantage, the new advantage that the Finance Minister had given the nation, because that to me was certainly a very good statement, and we're looking ahead. And I think he'll find in there all the things that he said show up will be coming in the future. We will be doing lots for our seniors, lots for those that are in poverty. And as that plan goes forward, I just would like to say to member, this year my daughter gets married on New Year's Eve, and while she's making her wedding plans, I'm helping make her plans with this party and this government for her future. And I know right now she loves the working tax that is going to be implemented. I know that she will in the future. I hope not any sooner than first of all, let's get the wedding over. And I know there's very many advantages, and that's why I think that we're looking on and into the future. And I would also like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, including those that are here with us so many times in the evening, the pages, and everyone, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And can you offer my daughter a better plan than what we have? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Well, the brief answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes, we can. But the longer answer is that governments make choices. And it's not just about what they're proposing to do in the future. They're chewing up dollars on things like the GST and providing $1,200 to families, many of whom do not need that money like others do. Let me go back in my answer to what my mother told me years ago. She said, if you go into politics, Mr. Speaker, you will do the right thing, because you have to understand you go into public service to help those who need help, not those who don't. I don't know how long I'll serve in this chamber, but I know that while I'm here, that will be my cause. In Budget 2006, The gap between rich and poor was increased, and that is unconscionable. And I think Canadians have told the Finance Committee that it's wrong. It's not the Canadian way, and I want to see in Budget 2007, and Canadians want to see in Budget in 2007, a recognition that all Canadians deserve the attention of this government and not just the well-to-do.
Resuming debate, Honourable Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that I have but a few minutes before the fall sessions comes to an end, but I would like to refer to, say a few things to the party opposite it. What I've noticed in the Finance Committee report is a significant number of recommendations, and these recommendations do not coincide with what we would call measures to help the needy in our society, whether they be women, minority language groups, Human Rights Commission of Canada, the Courts Challenges Program. These are all programs that would have continued helping people who didn't have the financial means to help themselves or who didn't know exactly who should they turn to. I note in this report that most of the recommendations say that these programs must continue, that they must receive significant budgets from our government. And what I would like to know from the government is, does the government intend, does the Minister of Finance intend to listen to what his committee asked him to do, and that is restore the money that was cut from the most needy in our society? How could he slash these programs when we know that there are $13 billion sitting in the surplus for 2005-2006? So that's a summary in a few words of what I wanted to say. I have other examples, but I would like to draw the attention of my colleagues to the fact that the elected officials who sit on the Finance Committee, who are elected officials from all of the parties present in the House of Commons, that these people voted in favor of the recommendations contained in this report in the majority, and now it's the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to listen to his elected officials that listened to Canadians and who were elected by Canadians. And I hope that the Minister of Finance will remember that when he drafts his report or for the budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I proceed to the motion which I have in my hand, I just want to say to the assembled throng, a Merry Christmas, Joyeux Noël tout le monde, Happy Holidays.
Christmas to all.
And their families, and to the staff of the House who serve us so well, pages, members at the table, Sergeant-at-Arms, everybody, and interpreters. And it now being 5:30, pursuant to order made earlier today, the House stands adjourned until Monday, January the 29th, 2007, at 11 a.m., pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1.